Chapter 1036. But even so, Your Majesty still only cares about his imperial mausoleum. With Li Qitian's intelligence, no one believed that he really couldn't see the general situation. He had only risen from the grassroots to the top. For the past 8 years, he had been in an environment where he was surrounded by stars. After recovering the Dian, he had also quelled the Taytan rebellion. After hearing such praises too many times, Li Qitian inevitably became complacent, causing his eyes to be blinded. Perhaps it wasn't that he couldn't see the situation in the south. As the emperor, how could he not see the situation? Li Qitian was just hoping for a fluke. Perhaps he was thinking, even if it doesn't work, there are many granaries in the world, and there are many rich and benevolent people. If some people starve to death, then so be it. Is the Daiju dynasty going to be overthrown because of this? Qin Yining and Pang Xiao were both people who valued the lives of the common people. They couldn't understand Li Qitian's willful actions. Pang Xiao said, "The stone purchased by Zhong Ibor has already been paid for by the Ministry of Revenue and the Internal Treasury. The high-quality granite is being transported to Huichuan County one after another. In addition, Your Majesty has decreed that the warships of the previous dynasty should be dismantled and the wood used. There are also craftsmen at Jinggang dismantling the ships at the docks." Pang Xiao's thin lips curled up, and his phoenix eyes shone brightly. The new stones will be arriving one after another. The stone factory has limited space, and Zhong Ibor has already found a buyer for the defective goods. We can take this opportunity to transport them out. Sirs, the time we have been waiting for has come. Xie Yu and Xu Weiji were both shocked, and immediately felt extremely proud. To be honest, after resting in Danfu County these days, this old man has been so idle that his muscles and bones are loose. Xie Yu said with a smile. Xu Weiji covered his mouth and coughed twice, then joked, "Isn't that so? That old fellow always grumbles to me behind my back, complaining that Zhong Ibor's temperament is too slow, his methods too slow. He nags me so much that I feel like my ears are going to grow calluses. Since Zhong Ibor is finally making a move, why don't Wang Yi arrange more errands for old Xie so that he won't be too free?" Qin Yining and Pang Xiao could not help laughing. Xie Yu smiled and shook her head. "You're taking revenge on me because I stole your good tea last time. Don't tell me you feel wronged when I ask you to do more things to loosen your old arms and legs." Xu Wei couldn't help but laugh. As the two joked around, the atmosphere became much more relaxed. They had been planning for a long time, and now it was finally time to make a move. To be honest, not only was Xie Yu impatient, but Pang Xiao was also impatient. He was not in a hurry to use the money. His thoughts were almost the same as Qin Yining's. The situation in the south was unpredictable, and he was afraid that there would be a famine in the end. If this money was given to Li Qitian, it would definitely be used to fill the imperial mausoleum. If it was given to Lu Heng, it would only increase the strength of his opponent. If he took this money, disaster relief would be inevitable. Pang Xiao said, "Zhong Ibor is very cautious. Until the last moment, no one can be sure which route the treasure will take. This king has already ordered people to keep a close watch." Qin Yining lowered his eyes and thought for a moment, then said softly, "If I were Zhong Ibor, I would definitely not take the treasure with me. There are too many variables in this matter. As the saying goes, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. I would definitely divide the treasure and place it in several places. 1. It can divert attention. 2. It can ensure that if something goes wrong in one place, we won't lose everything." Pang Xiao smiled and nodded. He looked at Qin Yining with eyes full of admiration. "Wang Fei is very right." Xu Weiji smiled and said, "Now, Wang Yi, it would be best for you to order people to find out where the buyers of the defective goods are. We can use the terrain to analyze the situation. When the time comes, we will have a better chance of success." Pang Xiao said, "Sir is very right. This king has already assigned this matter. I think there will be results in 2 days." Sure enough, in 2 days, Pang Xiao listed the 10 locations of the stone on a piece of paper. He invited Xie Yu and Xu Weiji to study it. In the end, they came to a general conclusion. "Wang Yi, these 4 locations are most likely to be the locations. Xu Weiji pointed at the 4 locations on the map. They were Linnan Village, Wanzhou Village, Wanningdam, and Qinghang Slope. Xie Yu calmed his breathing and nodded in agreement. This old one agrees with Brother Shu's point of view. These 4 locations are the furthest away. Once someone tracks them, it will be easy to escape. And if this old one remembers correctly, according to our informant last time, these 4 locations are very coincidental. There are no side branches or disciples of the Lu family here. Wang Yi, take a look. Xie Yu pointed at the other 6 locations on the map. The common characteristic of these 6 locations was that there were side branches or disciples of the Lu family there. Zhong Yibo is very resourceful. He must have considered everything very thoroughly. Once something happens, the locations without the Lu family will be the least suspicious. Even if someone discovers this and wants to investigate, they will definitely focus their attention on the areas with the help of the Lu family. The 2 sirs' words make sense. Pang Xiao already had his guesses when he received the news. He discussed it with Qin Yining in private and came to the same conclusion. This king's men will continue to observe and determine which direction the treasure is being transported to. This king intends to prepare some carriages and stones for the transportation of the treasure. We will arrive at the path that the treasure must pass through first. When the time comes, we will find an opportunity to have our spies switch carriages. If we can avoid making a move, we will try our best not to. What do the 2 sirs think? Xie Yu smiled and said, Wang Yi is very thoughtful. Wang Yi's idea is very good. If we make a move, it will be the last step. Once we make a move, it will inevitably attract attention and it will be too easy to be exposed. It will be good if we can quietly switch carriages. I didn't expect Wang Yi to have already arranged the spies so deeply. Xie Yu sighed with emotion. Pang Xiao smiled and said, this is all thanks to Sister Yi. When Sister Yi found out that the treasure was at the stone factory, she arranged for the brothers from the Qingtian alliance to secretly sneak in. My subordinates are soldiers and are too eye-catching in a crowd. They are not as good at spying as the brothers from the Qingtian alliance. If they want to, it is very easy for them to hide among the common people. Since the stone factory needs to be transported and the imperial mausoleum needs to be built, there will naturally be people who will rush over. We also need to recruit some people from the local area to guard the place. Sister Yi arranged for a few reliable people to go in. The princess is indeed a female Zhuge Liang. Women are not inferior to men. Xie Yu and Xu Weiji were very emotional. Even though Qin Yining did not participate in their discussion today, she was not present. The matter had already been arranged. Wang Yi is really lucky to have the princess by his side. Xu Weiji sighed with emotion and said, a husband with a virtuous wife will have less trouble. The princess is not only deeply in love with Wang Yi, but she is also an outstanding strategist. Look at Zhong Yibo's house. TSK. Xu Weiji couldn't help but click his tongue when he finished speaking. During this period of time, there was a lot of news coming from Huichuan County. Whether it was useful or not, as long as it was related to Zhong Yibo, it would be passed to them. Therefore, they were very clear about the strange things that the shrew in Zhong Yibo's house did. In summary, Madame Bien was spoiled rotten. After marrying Zhong Yibo, she wanted too much and became more paranoid. Now, Zhong Yibo was unwilling to return home and stayed in the Yamen to seek peace and quiet. However, Madame Bien actually brought people to the Yamen to cause a ruckus. She did not care about other people's opinions at all. It was simply embarrassing for Zhong Yibo. When Pang Xiao thought of Lu Heng's thoughts about Qin Yining, he felt a wave of disgust in his heart. If he didn't have delusional thoughts about Qin Yining from the beginning and embarrassed Madame Bien in public on their wedding day, Madame Bien wouldn't have done all kinds of extreme things and gradually become more and more intense. As a man, since he agreed to marry, he should be responsible for his family. If he didn't want to marry, he could just refuse. Would someone put a knife to his neck? If he agreed, he would live his life well. After marrying, he didn't treat his wife well. It wasn't that Madame Bien didn't allow Lu Heng to take concubines, but Lu Heng only cared about a married woman. His character was really worrying and disdainful. Pang Xiao snorted coldly in his heart. He didn't hesitate about the matter of the treasure. With Lu Heng's character, he didn't have any psychological burden at all even if he cheated him. In the next few days, news came from Huichuan County one after another. Through the observations of the spies and Pang Xiao's analysis, they could roughly determine which direction the treasure would be transported to. Now, they were waiting for the day of the shipment. Because the defective goods had to be transported to different places, and considering the problem of loading the goods, the day of departure from the shipping office was naturally different. Soon, 2 batches of stone materials were transported out. Lu Heng had been working hard for the past few days, and there were faint dark circles under his eyes. It was true that ever since he took on the task of supervising the Imperial Mausoleum, the burden on his shoulders had increased. In the past, he could only look at this matter with the mentality of watching a show. Now, he really had to be responsible for it himself. If he didn't do it well, he would be blamed by Your Majesty. It was already complicated to deal with the task given by Your Majesty, and he still had to deal with the matter of the treasure in private. Fortunately, after careful arrangements during this period of time, everything was going according to his plan. "Uncle, there is nothing unusual outside." Lu Wanru lowered his voice and reported to Lu Heng in a low voice. Lu Heng smiled slightly and felt a little relieved. "Then let's transport a batch tomorrow." Lu Heng turned around and walked to the side of the table, taking out a folded map from the stack of books behind him. After the map was spread out on the table, Lu Heng picked up the lampstand and observed it closely. After a moment, he pointed in the northwest direction. "Let's transport it here first." Lu Wanru looked in the direction of Lu Heng's finger and saw the 3 words "Wanning Dam" on his fingernail. The next morning, just as the sky was turning white, the stone factory was already bustling with activity. There were already workers working through the night, moving pieces of heavy granite onto the carriages. At this time, the coachman and the accompanying workers were all ready. The well-proportioned and strong cows were brought over. For a small matter like selling stone materials, Lu Heng naturally didn't need to personally come with his status. Even his personal attendant, Lu Wanru, wouldn't come in person. However, there were still a lot of Lu Heng's spies in the stone factory. Seeing the 10 carriages move out smoothly, the workers in the stone factory dispersed. Some went to catch up on sleep, and some went to eat breakfast. The group transporting this batch of stones was temporarily transferred from a caravan and 2 escort agencies. Because they knew that these stones were defective goods that weren't used in the construction of the Imperial Mausoleum, even if these stones weren't used in the Imperial Mausoleum, as long as the word Imperial was involved, the matter would be much more serious. Chapter 1037. From Huichuan County to Wanningdam, it would only take 3 or 4 days if they rode fast horses. However, since they were transporting heavy goods such as granite, the speed would be extremely slow. The journey was very smooth. Some of the people in the team who had received special instructions from Lu Heng also slowly let down their guard. 7 days later, the team finally arrived at a small village that was only a day's journey away from Wanningdam. After everyone had eaten and drank to their fill, they left someone to keep watch and then went to sleep. There was only 1 day left until Wanningdam. After handing over the goods, their mission would be safely completed. The next day, the team set off again. However, no one noticed that 2 of the carriages had been swapped. When Pang Xiao received the news from Jinghu Wei, he was finally able to relax. He divided a portion of Jinghu Wei with him and ordered them to protect the goods until they reached the designated location. In the following half a month, 6 more teams set off in different directions from the Huichuan County Stone Factory. Pang Xiao used the same method and successfully swapped out 2 more batches of treasures. Everything went so smoothly. Didn't Lu Boy notice that the stones he transported were swapped out? Qin Yining said lazily as he leaned against a soft bamboo pillow and waved a plain silk fan in his hand. Pang Xiao used a bamboo stick to stick a piece of honeydew melon in front of Qin Yining's mouth and said with a smile, "He is such a meticulous person. He has been preparing for several months. He must be very calm. He will only reveal the treasures after he is sure that there is nothing unusual and the limelight has passed. It is because I guessed his thoughts that I was able to use this method to swap out the treasures." Qin Yining chuckled and picked up the teacup to rinse his mouth. It seems that if some things are too cautious, it will delay the important matters. Yes. Excessive caution is indecisiveness. If this happens on the battlefield, it is very likely that the opportunity will be missed. Winning or losing on the battlefield involves human lives. That's why you've developed such a decisive character. Qin Yining put down his silk fan, sat up, and put his arm around Pang Xiao's shoulder and neck. When he got closer, the faint fragrance on her body enveloped him. Pang Xiao smiled and held her slender waist. He stole a kiss from her cherry lips that still had the sweet fragrance of honeydew. He said with a smile, "I can't even remember how many times I've escaped a calamity because I made a quick decision." Therefore, he understood the importance of being decisive. However, the prerequisite is that you have to think things through clearly. You can't just casually make a decision. That would be an arbitrary decision, and you might even lose the lives of your brothers, harming others and yourself. Qin Yining nodded obediently. Her slender fingers twirled a strand of Pang Xiao's hair that had fallen over her shoulder. Her watery eyes were filled with gentleness. Pang Xiao's body and mind almost melted in her gentle eyes. He slowly approached her as if he was possessed. His low voice was slightly hoarse. "If someone came to stab me with a knife right now, I wouldn't want to dodge." Qin Yining burst out laughing when he heard that. Just as their lips were about to touch, Ji Yun's slightly anxious voice suddenly came from outside. "Wang Yi, princess consort, there's a message from Tang Xiu. Mr. Xie wants us to inform Wang Yi as soon as possible." Pang Xiao's movements paused. He sighed softly in disappointment. Qin Yining said, "Go quickly. Since you're in such a hurry, it must be something important." She pulled him up and tidied his clothes. Pang Xiao said, "Come with me to take a look. It's boring to stay in the house." Qin Yining thought about it and agreed. The tailored clothes were already made and 2 pairs of shoes were also made. There was no urgent need for needlework. She could only read some miscellaneous books when she was free. "Okay." Qin Yining agreed and called Ji Yun in to help her dress neatly. The two of them quickly rushed to the front. As soon as Tang Xiu saw Pang Xiao, she did not care about etiquette. She hastily cupped her hands and took out a letter from her bosom. "Wang Yi, when we left the city today, a little beggar gave this subordinate this." This subordinate was suspicious and opened it to take a look. Who knew that this was a letter? The note inside asked this subordinate to give this subordinate this letter to Wang Yi. This is a matter of life and death. This subordinate did not dare to delay and hurriedly came back. As he spoke, Pang Xiao had already taken the letter. There was indeed a smaller letter inside. When she saw the familiar handwriting on the letter, Pang Xiao frowned. Xie Yu and Xu Weiji were also gathered here. When they saw this, they were very curious and wanted to take a closer look. However, they were a little worried that they would overstep the rules. "Sirs, please take a look." Pang Xiao seemed to understand their thoughts and handed the letter to Xie Yu and Xu Weiji. Facing Qin Yining's questioning gaze, Pang Xiao said, "This is a letter that Dao Hanshan wrote to me. Other than paying his respects, he also told me an important message." "An important message?" Qin Yining asked doubtfully. "Previously, when Mr. Dao left, he also left a letter for you. He said that no matter where he goes, he will always do his best for Wang Yi's great cause." "Yes. Dao Hanshan also said that we should not touch the last batch of goods. He has already informed Your Majesty about this. Your Majesty will definitely rush to Huichuan." "What?" Qin Yining's eyes widened in shock. Xie Yu and Xu Weiji also returned the letter to Pang Xiao with complicated expressions. "This last batch of goods is to be transported to Wanzhou town. Everything has already been arranged. What if we stop now?" Xie Yu frowned, and the wrinkles on her face were even more obvious because of her conflicted expression. However, Xu Weiji said, "Based on our many years of working together, although Dao Hanshan is a little stubborn and unscrupulous, he has a good grasp of the overall situation. He also has high expectations for Wang Yi. This time, he should have done so." Xu Weiji's words were reserved, but from his tone, he had already expressed it very clearly. Dao Han's Han must have followed the letter and informed the emperor that the treasure was about to be transported to Wanzhou town. With Li Qitian's suspicious personality and how much he valued the treasure, he would definitely rush over this time. Furthermore, the treasure that Pang Xiao had already successfully robbed was very likely to be targeted by Li Qitian. Pang Xiao said, Dao Han's Han assassinated Sister Yi, which is really abominable. However, this king also understands his personality over the years. This time, as Mr. Xu said, this letter should be true. He has a great desire for power, and I'm afraid that he is still pinning his hopes on this king. Therefore, he thinks that this is the best way to assist this king. After pondering for a moment, he said, this king thinks that Dao Hanshan's ability is still worthy of recognition. His ambition for power also prevents him from betraying this king for the time being. Therefore, this batch of goods to be transported to Wanzhou town. It's best for us to observe in secret. Xie Yu, Xu Weiji, and Tang Xiu all nodded in agreement. Xie Yu said in admiration, Wang Yi knows how to make good use of people. He is broad-minded and can even be so forgiving towards that traitor Dao Han's Han. It is truly admirable. Pang Xiao waved his hand and said, it's not that this king is forgiving. It's just that he understands Dao Han's Han more and more. However, I am somewhat worried that the world will fall into chaos. Qin Yining frowned and said, with your majesty's personality, he will definitely rush over as soon as possible. He values the treasure so much. When the time comes, the news that your majesty left the capital for the treasure will spread like wildfire. Qin Yining exhaled and said somewhat heavily, my people have sent news. Although the flood in the south has stopped, there is really not enough food to eat. The common people are digging wild vegetables and peeling tree bark to allay their hunger. At this time, the relief from the imperial court has not arrived and your majesty is making a big fuss over the treasure. Who knows what kind of rumors will spread? The common people are starving. Seeing that an even bigger famine is about to break out, the emperor still does not give them relief. He only knows how to repair the imperial mausoleum and dig for the treasure. He does not think about the common people. What if the people are agitated and rebel? When that time comes, the world will fall into chaos. The world has only just stopped. Qin Yining's analysis was reasonable. The others couldn't help but feel their hearts sink. Xie Yu said after a moment, Wang Fei is right. Because of this, everything we have done to obtain the treasure is not wrong. Actually, although it is called a treasure, it was obtained when the Yang dynasty's incapable ruler plundered the common people. If we can take it and use it for the common people, it can be considered a good thing. Exactly. Pang Xiao said, now that things are complicated, we can only take one step at a time. Dao Han's Han may have told the emperor about this matter without thinking of provoking the emperor to do something extreme. Let's just wait and see. If the emperor does not come, we can succeed. If he comes, we have to plan for the long term. Otherwise, Qin Yining shook his head, I'm afraid that if your majesty really comes, we won't have time to plan for the long term. With Qin Yining's reminder, Pang Xiao immediately understood and said, with your majesty's suspicion, he will only suspect me. What's more, Lu Heng will implicate me. Exactly. So Wang Yi should sit down and prepare in advance. After the plan was set, Qin Yining did not stay any longer to avoid disturbing Pang Xiao and the strategist's discussion. He returned to the inner residence alone. Ji Yun was instructing the young maidservants to clean the courtyard. Seeing Qin Yining return, she smiled and came forward to welcome. Wang Fei, you are back. Did you find out the matter I asked you to investigate? Ji Yun nodded and followed Qin Yining into the room. She went to the square table and poured a cup of tea for her before saying, everything seems normal in the Wang family. There are still not many servants in the Fu. However, I heard some rumors that philanthropist Wang seems to have developed hysteria. Oh. Qin Yining's hand that was holding the cup of tea paused. Then he smiled coldly, he is still lacking. Ji Yun looked at Qin Yining in confusion. Qin Yining said, he hates the Yu family that stole his property. He hates his wife for being heartless. Thus, he vented his anger on all the people in Danfu County. Because most of the people in Danfu County come from the three great families, and the three great families influence each other, The people are also pedantic and believe in family rules. They do not care about laws. Even if the people in Danfu County knew that he was robbed of his property, no one stood up for him because he is an outsider. Chapter 1038. Qin Yining thought that philanthropist Wang must have felt guilty towards Sakurai. If he didn't feel guilty, he wouldn't have saved them for Sakurai's sake and even told her the truth. But this guilt was too little, and it couldn't compare to his hatred. It couldn't compare to his vicious desire to bury the entire Danfu County. That day, Sakurai killed more than 100 people in Danfu County because of his idea. Could it be that philanthropist Wang didn't feel the slightest bit of joy? Sakurai died, but he didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt or regret. But it was useless to say anything now. It was ironic that a despicable person like philanthropist Wang was called a philanthropist by everyone. 2 days later, before the news from Huichuan County arrived, someone unexpectedly returned to the residence. Qin Yining received the news and immediately went to the front hall. He saw Liao Zhibing and Meng Qin with 2 other brothers from the Qingtian alliance, as well as Jinghu Wei, who was arranged by Pang Xiao, sitting in the front hall. They looked very disheveled, as if they were all injured. Qin Yining said in shock, "Mr. Liao, everyone, what happened to you? You didn't go to Japan? Did something happen on the way?" Liao Zhibing waved his hand and pointed at the wooden box on the side table. It was Sakurai's ashes, and they were still in the same state as when Qin Yining wrapped them up. "Alliance Master, we set off from Golden Harbor and soon arrived at Wo Nation. I used to think that Wo Nation was very far away from us, but now that I've been there, I know that the closest land to us in Wo Nation is only a few days after we set sail. Since we've already found Japan, how did it end up like this? Did you run into pirates?" Qin Yining picked up the white porcelain teapot and poured a cup of tea for Liao Zhibing. Liao Zhibing hurriedly stood up and accepted the cup with both hands. After thanking him, he drank it in one gulp, then shook his head and said, "Actually, things went smoothly. We thought it would take at least a year or so to find out more about Sakurai. Who would have thought that after we arrived in Japan, we would be able to find out more information? Sakurai was exiled from the water swamp country where we landed." "Water swamp country?" Qin Yining sat at the head of the table. Meng Qin was young and impatient. She said quickly, "Alliance Master, you don't know, right? Now the Wo Nation is in chaos. We don't know how they did it. There are many feudal lords everywhere. They are called daimyo or generals. A few hundred people formed a large village, and they dare to call themselves a country. A dozen or so Japanese people wearing a pair of loincloths and holding bamboo sticks gathered together to fight, and they have the nerve to call it a battle." Seeing Meng Qin's outrageous words, Liao Zhibing coughed and said, "Alliance leader, this is indeed the case. Water swamp country is close to the sea, which is where we landed. The village is even smaller than Danfu County, and it only has one main road. The commoners mainly fished and farmed to support the 200 or so local soldiers. These soldiers were all loyal to the local daimyo, Ishikawa Fusei. Sakurai is a ninja who is loyal to Ishikawa daimyo. When we arrived, we found out that the commoners had a very bad opinion of Sakurai. Apparently, Sakurai betrayed Ishikawa daimyo. The daimyo was merciful and didn't kill him on the spot. Those who betray the daimyo don't even have the right to commit seppuku." Qin Yining asked curiously, "Did you find out how Sakurai got here?" Apparently, Ishikawa daimyo ordered someone to tie Sakurai to a template and throw him into the sea. I'm guessing that Sakurai was lucky and floated here. Maybe he met a kind soul on the way and saved him." Liao Zhibing shook his head and sighed. "I heard that. We brought Sakurai's ashes back and wanted to bury him in his hometown. The local commoners were very opposed to it. They despised those who betrayed the daimyo. They even beat us up. We couldn't really kill them," one of the Jinghu Wei said, feeling wronged. Meng Qin also said, "But maybe it was because the commotion was too big. When we set up camp in the middle of the night, a Japanese man came." "What was his name?" Meng Qin shrugged and nudged the brother next to her. It was a member of the Qingtian alliance who knew Japanese. "His name was Gao Delai. He was in his early 30s. His skin was dark, and his hands and feet were thick and strong. Gao Delai smiled shyly. Alliance Master, that man is called Hiragana. He was Sakurai's best friend. He also worked under Ishikawa Daimyo. I heard that he was a ninja with a good reputation. Chin Yining was puzzled. Ninja? He's like the silver-masked spies around the Alliance Master. Most of them are highly skilled in martial arts. They're good at spying, assassinating, collecting intelligence, and messing with the enemy. Sakurai used to be a very famous ninja around Ishikawa Daimyo. Liao Jibing added, Hiragana said that Sakurai was actually killed by Ishikawa Daimyo. Back then, they were in a war with some country. Sakurai was sent to assassinate some important person. In the end, Ishikawa Daimyo betrayed them at the last minute. He was even accused of destroying the friendship between the two countries and was exiled. Of course the people are afraid of war. Sakurai secretly assassinated an important person from another country and destroyed the peace. The people despised him. Only a few people knew the truth, but none of them were willing to stand up for Sakurai. Hiragana was Sakurai's good friend, but he also hesitated and backed down. It was too late for regrets. Chin Yining lowered her eyes and fell silent. He didn't expect things to be like this. Sakurai was betrayed by her former master. After drifting here, she was saved by philanthropist Wang Da. In the end, she was betrayed again and sacrificed herself to save her life. Alliance Master, you don't know. When I looked at Hiragana, I felt that he was very similar to Sakurai. Ninjas like them have bad tempers, right? They're very stubborn. Hiragana also said that he didn't clear Sakurai's name. He didn't even have the right to commit seppuku. He didn't stand up for Sakurai at that time, and he didn't accompany Sakurai to be exiled. He blamed himself very much and has been living in regret ever since. Meng Qin also sighed and said, I just feel that their people seem to pay special attention to promises, loyalty, and stubbornness. Chin Yining now understood why Sakurai was depressed for so many years after being betrayed by philanthropist Wang Da. He didn't hesitate to let someone destroy one of his arms and one of his legs. It was just as she had guessed. His faith collapsed and he lost his goal. Later, he tried his best to protect her. Maybe he wanted to repay her for the meal and recognize her as his master. Otherwise, Chin Yining couldn't think of a reason why a ninja would sacrifice his life for someone who didn't matter to him. The scene of that dark night filled with blood once again appeared in front of her eyes. Sakurai's frail body had stubbornly protected her, shielding her from harm again and again. He'd rather use his own body to block a knife than let her suffer a single injury. When she thought of this, Chin Yining's heart filled with anger. She hated Dao Hanshan for plotting to kill Sakurai, hated philanthropist Wang for betraying Sakurai, and even more hated the daimyo Ishikawa, who had sent his subordinate to take the blame. Chin Yining's expression changed again and again. Her eyebrows were furrowed, and her eyes were filled with power. Everyone knew that the princess consort was truly angry. Even Meng Qin, who loved to talk the most, kept quiet out of fear. Chin Yining asked, that daimyo Ishikawa went around spreading rumors about Sakurai's crimes. That's why the people of Water Swamp Country refused to accept him. They didn't even want to bury him in his hometown. He even forced you out. Yes. Liao Jibing nodded. Chin Yining gritted his teeth and slammed the table. He's gone too far. Alliance Master, please calm down. Princess Consort, please calm down. Everyone stood up and bowed their heads. Chin Yining took a few deep breaths. She felt that she'd gone too far. She shouldn't have let her emotions affect the people in front of her. She couldn't help but stand up and apologize. I'm sorry. I'm truly grateful that you've all gone through so much to cross the ocean. I was too angry just now and couldn't control my emotions. Chin Yining was the princess consort. Even if she blamed them for not doing their job well, they wouldn't have expected her to apologize. Everyone was moved and hurriedly bowed. Princess consort, you're wrong. That's right. The Alliance Master is a sentimental person. It's normal for him to be angry over something like this. After the two sides exchanged some pleasantries, Liao Jibing said, Alliance Master, We weren't able to bury Sakurai this time. What do you plan to do with his ashes? How about this subordinate go and find a place with good feng shui to bury Sakurai? It's too tiring to wander around like this. Qin Yining nodded and said, let's find a good place to bury him first. In the future, I'll definitely demand an explanation from that daimyo Ishikawa. There's no reason for him to continue being the daimyo of Water Swamp Country after harming so many people. There's no such thing in this world. When everyone heard this, they all felt a sense of pride. They never would have thought that even across the ocean, Qin Yining would be willing to demand justice for the people who sacrificed themselves for her. They rejoiced at their decision to follow Qin Yining. If Qin Yining was so loyal to Sakurai, who she'd only known for a few days, what more the brothers in the alliance who'd gone through life and death with her? They all nodded repeatedly. Even the Jinghu Wei felt their blood boil. They all said that if they ever went to find that daimyo Ishikawa, they'd definitely bring them along. Qin Yining thanked them politely and arranged a place for them to stay. He also found a doctor to treat their injuries. Fortunately, their injuries were only superficial and weren't serious. Sakurai's ashes were temporarily placed in an empty room by Qin Yining so that they could burn incense in the morning and evening. 3,000 cavalrymen galloped quickly on the official road. The horses' hooves kicked up a cloud of dust behind them. On the leading red horse, Li Chitian, who was dressed in black and had a bright yellow cloak draped over his shoulders, was whipping his horse. He turned around and urged the people behind him to keep up. Li Chitian was burning with anxiety. Qian Ying had fought alongside him in the past. Later on, he was conferred the title of Count and was in charge of the Ministry of Science and Technology. He had always been loyal to him. Therefore, the news he sent must be correct. Who would have thought that Lu Heng would be so daring as to take the treasure for himself? Your Majesty, you can already see Huichuan County. Chapter 1039. Yes, Your Majesty. Ma Cheng answered loudly and immediately sent out troops to outflank Huichuan County. Li Chitian was burning with anxiety at this time. When Li Chitian first received the news of the treasure, he suspected that it was fake news sent by someone with bad intentions to lure him away from the capital. But he was reluctant to give up this opportunity. What if the treasure was real? What if he didn't go and the treasure really fell into Lu Heng's hands? Lu Heng could hide this news, but who knew what he was plotting? Moreover, Qian Ying had always been his trusted minister and had a wide network of contacts. He had a counselor who knew about Lu Heng's actions from various channels and told his master. If this news was false, he would have made a wasted trip at most. If it was true, the crisis of his empty treasury would be solved. Li Chitian was more and more certain that this trip was correct, and his eyes were more and more anxious. The troops rushed forward for a while, and the buildings of Huichuan County became more and more clear in the wilderness under the scorching noon sun. Li Chitian raised his whip and was about to move, but he saw a man riding a horse quickly coming from the opposite side. The man was wearing a dark blue short robe, his hair was tied up high, his face was square, and his appearance was ordinary. He was a person who couldn't be found in a crowd. He was Li Chitian's spy named Zhu Meng. Your Majesty. Li Chitian slowed down his pace, and the thousands of soldiers and horses behind him also slowed down. A cloud of dust was blown up on the dirt road by the wind, making people squint their eyes. But behind the emperor, the cavalry all looked solemn and didn't make the slightest sound except for the sound of the horse's hooves. His horse galloped to the front. Li Chitian reined in the red date horse and pointed his whip at the messenger. Quickly report this. Zhu Meng flew down from the horse, kneeled on one knee and cupped his fist. Greetings to Your Majesty. The last batch of stones from the stone factory has been sent out from the south gate and went straight to Wanzhou town. Li Chitian sneered, it's really better to come early than to come at the right time. Men, follow me to pursue. Yes. The rest of the soldiers responded in unison. Li Chitian then instructed Ma Cheng, go into the city and take control of Huichuan County for the time being. Don't do anything else. The most important thing is to keep an eye on Zhong Ibo. Ma Cheng's heart skipped a beat. He had a vague premonition that the world was about to fall into chaos. He hurriedly suppressed his wild thoughts and solemnly bowed. This subject accepts the decree. Li Chitian hastily led 1,000 men and horses to bypass Huichuan County, heading straight for Wanzhou town. On the other hand, Ma Cheng ordered his deputy generals to surround Huichuan County while dispatching troops to bring them into the city. Seeing a group of soldiers heading towards the city gate, the citizens who were entering and exiting the city all dodged to the side in fear. When the guards at the city gate saw that it was the cavalry of the 5th military camp, they knew that something must have happened. They hurriedly opened the city gate and quietly retreated to the side. It was the busiest time of the day in Huichuan County. Women with grocery baskets and businessmen walked on both sides of the street in twos and threes. Everyone was worried, frowning as they discussed today's food prices in low voices. In the city, there was a long line of people in front of the rice store, snaking across 2 streets. It was late autumn, and the sun was shining brightly in the main house. The citizens squinted their eyes because of the sun. As soon as the cavalry led by Ma Cheng entered the city, the citizens on the street screamed in fear and stumbled to the sides of the road to avoid them. Seeing the cavalry charge forward, everyone was panicking. The women gathered together in fear and discussed in low voices. What's going on? What is the imperial court going to do? Why does it seem like these soldiers are heading towards the county government? Which noble did County Magistrate Lu offend in the imperial court? Ma Cheng couldn't help but curl his lips when he heard the citizens' discussion. Didn't he offend a noble? And this time, Zhong Yibor offended the noblest person in the imperial court. The soldiers quickly surrounded the government office. Each of the soldiers was like a ferocious tiger coming down from the mountain. They fiercely rushed into the government office, causing the bailiffs to question them loudly. Who are you? How dare you come to the government office and behave atrociously? Ma Cheng strode over with a saber in one hand and said loudly, all of you, behave yourselves. I am here on your Majesty's verbal order. If anyone dares to resist, they will be charged with treason. The bailiffs were stunned for a moment. The soldiers from the 5 barracks had a murderous aura. Each of them was like a wolf or a tiger. The bailiffs didn't want to cause any trouble and implicate their families. Naturally, they stood quietly at the side, waiting for Ma Cheng's order anxiously. General, we didn't find him. Someone followed the order to search, but they didn't find Lu Heng. Ma Cheng was stunned. He immediately glared at the bailiffs beside him and shouted, "Where is Zhong Yibor?" Some of the bailiffs hesitated, but some judged the situation and said, "It seems that something happened to the countess." Zhong Yibor rushed home. Ma Cheng immediately ordered some people to stay behind at the government office. The rest went straight to Zhong Yibor's residence. At this time, Lu Heng had indeed returned home. However, it wasn't because of Bian Ruohan. It was because the situation had been decided. He hadn't slept for many days. He felt tense in the government office and couldn't sleep. Thus, he wanted to go home and have a good sleep. Bian Ruohan was flattered when he heard that Lu Heng had returned. He hurriedly ordered, "Quickly prepare the Earl's favorite dishes." She hurriedly checked herself in the mirror and put on her favorite twin flower hairpin. Then, she touched up her rouge and applied lipstick. Only then did she walk to the study in the outer courtyard. However, when she arrived at the courtyard where the study was located, she was stopped by Lu Wanru and his men. "Madam, the Earl has been tired for many days. He just went to bed." Bian Ruohan's face immediately turned cold. The Earl has returned to the residence. Even if he wanted to rest, he should go to the inner courtyard. Why would he rest here? You dog slave, are you making fun of me? Lu Wanru was Lu Heng's personal attendant. He was the most dignified. Bian Ruohan was displeased when he kept calling him a dog slave. However, Lu Wanru was gentle and rational by nature. He knew that the countess in front of him was from a poor family. She didn't even hesitate to make a fuss in front of the Earl. Moreover, with his status, he couldn't argue with the lady of the house. Lu Wanru could only cup his hands and say, "Madam, please go back. The Earl is truly very tired and has finally fallen asleep. Madam, please take care of the Earl. Don't disturb his good sleep." Bian Ruohan felt that he had been humiliated. He was so angry that his face turned purple. He pointed at Lu Wunru and said through gritted teeth, "You damn slave. You dare." Who knew that before he could finish speaking, a boom came from behind him. Bien Ruahan screamed in fright and hid behind a servant girl in a panic. Lu Wunru was shocked. He hurriedly led his men out of the courtyard and towards the door. Before he could get close, he saw the black door being hit again. Another dull boom sounded. The two doors were forcefully knocked down. The doormen and workers at the door were scared silly. Soldiers wearing the uniforms of the 5 armies swarmed in. At this moment, Lu Wunru had no time to react. He was pressed to the ground in the blink of an eye amidst the screams of his servants. Lifting his head with difficulty, Lu Wunru saw a burly middle-aged general walking over with a sword in his hand. He recognized the man when he got closer. This man was the commander-in-chief of the 5 armies East Road. "The man your majesty relies heavily on." The black war boots stopped in front of him. Ma Cheng said in a deep voice, "Your majesty has ordered us to surround the Lu residence." "Where is Zhong Ibo?" Lu Wunru's heart skipped a beat. "Oh no, this is bad." Your majesty rushed over in such a hurry as if he was raiding the residence. He didn't even wait to knock on the door and directly broke down the door. Could it be that what the count did in private had been leaked? Ma Cheng knew that Lu Heng didn't like Bien Ruahan, so he wanted to lock Bien Ruahan in the same room as him. Lu Heng didn't have the time to think about anything else. Due to the extreme lack of sleep, his brain was a little slow. Now, he finally understood. Chapter 1040. Lu Heng was finally a little flustered, but as a person from an aristocratic family, he had been trained since he was young, and it was not like he had never seen big storms before, so Lu Heng quickly calmed down. Even though he was dressed casually, his temperament was still noble. "Since your majesty has sent you all to protect me, then I will have to trouble you all. As for madam, she will naturally have to stay with me. There are still many empty rooms in the residence, so please feel free to do as you wish." After saying this, Lu Heng turned around and walked towards the study. He unhappily twisted his shoulders a few times with the large hands on his shoulders. The soldiers were intimidated by his majesty and naturally let go. Ma Cheng was also alerted by Lu Heng's words. If your majesty really wanted to punish Zhong Ibo, then he probably wouldn't just send people to watch over him. Instead, he would directly search and confiscate his property. Zhong Ibo was born in the Lu clan. The Lu clan's foundation was very deep, and its connections in the imperial court were also very complicated. He only needed to deal with your majesty's orders. There was no need for him to be overbearing. Thinking of this, Ma Cheng smiled and cupped his hands. "Count, you are a righteous person. I am just following orders. There are many things that I have to do. I hope you can understand." When Lu Heng saw that Ma Cheng's attitude had changed, Lu Heng's expression softened. He nodded and entered the study. Bien Ruahan naturally avoided the fate of being pushed. He followed Lu Heng into the study with a face full of anger and grievance. The rest of the Lu clan servants, including Lu Wunru, were all closely guarded in the eastern courtyard. Ma Cheng sat under the shade of a tree and drank a large bowl of tea. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief. Li Chitian led 1,000 cavalrymen and rushed towards Wanzhou town. In less than half an hour, they caught up with the caravan that was transporting the stones. "Quick, intercept this caravan." Yes. The cavalrymen of the 5 battalions were well trained. As soon as Li Chitian gave the order, they quickly moved. The guards and escorts of the caravan were all stunned by the sudden turn of events. Before they could react, they were swarmed by the cavalry and captured alive. Li Chitian quickly stepped forward and shouted, "Check the stones." Zhu Meng immediately led a dozen people to inspect the ox carts one by one. The ropes of more than 10 ox carts were removed one by one. Everyone used their scabbards to knock on the rocks until they heard different sounds coming from the rocks. "Your Majesty." Zhu Meng pointed at a carriage in the middle. "Please take a look." As soon as the words "Your Majesty" were heard, the hearts of Lu Heng's cronies, who were being suppressed, turned cold. Li Chitian quickly stepped forward and personally knocked on the scabbard. Finally he excitedly said, "This is it." Quick. After receiving the order, everyone became more and more busy. Soon, they found all the stone boxes hidden in the 10 carriages. With great effort, they found a gap and opened the thin layer of stones. Golden bars, jadeite, agate, and gemstones sparkled under the scorching sun. Li Chitien's eyes lit up. He was extremely excited. Ben stepped forward and grabbed a string of pearls, a handful of gemstones, and finally checked the gold bars. His heart was filled with relief. Found it, found it. It seemed that he was indeed the son of heaven. The treasures that many people coveted were found by him. What Tian Jiz's approval? It was not worth mentioning at all. Li Chitian was overjoyed. He immediately ordered people to return to the city to prepare ordinary boxes and carriages. He led the troops to guard the area. As for the escorts who were transporting the stones, they wished they could go blind. They saw the secret of the Son of Heaven. They were afraid that they would be silenced, right? They transported the boxes, counted the treasures, and recorded them. By the time they were done, it was already evening and the sky was filled with rosy clouds. Li Chitian looked at the 2 large camphor wood boxes filled with treasures and couldn't help but feel somewhat dissatisfied. Although they are all genuine treasures, there are still too few of them. Everyone lowered their eyes in silence. Too little. Any 1 or 2 of them would be enough for a family to eat for 10 or 20 years. Too little. Zhu Meng knew what Li Chitian was thinking. He timely said, "Your Majesty, it is said that the granite that Zhong Yibor transported was headed to more than 10 places." Li Chitian was stunned when he heard this. Then, his eyes lit up and his heart brightened. That's right. They found so many treasures in one place. With Lu Heng's shrewdness, there was no way he would put all the treasures in one place. There must be more treasures hidden in these 10 places. What a Lu Heng! He found the treasures and wanted to take them all for himself. He even dared to play tricks with me. Li Chitian thought of Lu Heng's deception and immediately became angry. He ordered everyone to first transport the 2 boxes of treasures to the capital. If there was a mistake, the entire family would be executed. How could anyone dare to be negligent? For the sake of the entire family, they would keep an eye on each other and not let anything go wrong with the treasures. After assigning people to transport the treasures, Li Chitian led his people back to Huichuan County. It was close to noon and the city gates were about to close. Li Chitian rushed over with his people. When they saw the bright yellow figure, everyone in front of the city gates hurriedly knelt down to welcome him. Even the common people on the streets knelt down when they heard the cheers. Oh my God, this is incredible. The emperor actually came to Huichuan County. Is it to inspect the imperial tombs? No wonder so many cavalrymen came at noon and surrounded the entire Huichuan County. Now, they finally knew the reason. Li Chitian rushed to the Lu family and jumped off the horse without waiting for it to stand still. He had been in the army for many years. However, 8 years of living like a prince had caused his martial arts to be wasted. When he got off the horse, he almost sprained his waist. He held the horsewhip and stood there for a while to catch his breath. Then, he glanced at the head eunuch, Xiong Jinshui, who was following him closely. Xiong Jinshui immediately understood and passed the message inside. Your Majesty has arrived. The entire Lu family was in an uproar. Ma Cheng immediately led the soldiers out to welcome him. The well-trained soldiers of the 5 military camps knelt down one after another. Their cheers shook the air and even the common people nearby were alarmed. Li Chitian calmed himself down and slowly raised his hand. Rise. Seeing that Lu Heng was not in the crowd, Li Chitian raised his eyebrows and asked Ma Cheng after entering, "Where is Zhong Yibor?" Replying to Your Majesty, Zhong Yibor is in the study in the outer courtyard. I ordered people to guard him. As long as he didn't run away. Li Chitian heaved a sigh of relief and walked steadily to the study. Ma Cheng ordered someone to open the door of the study. Li Chitian looked inside and saw Lu Heng and Bian Shi kneeling on the ground. This humble subject respectfully welcomes Your Majesty. This humble subject greets Your Majesty. Lu Heng had already changed into a silver-white loose robe embroidered with bamboo. Her hair was neatly coiled up and secured with a green jade bamboo hairpin. She had a calm and composed appearance, and there was not the slightest sign of a guilty conscience. Li Chitian sneered and walked slowly into the room. He waved his hand and said, "Bien sûr, leave." Chapter 1041. Bien Ruahan could feel that Your Majesty's aura wasn't right this time. She was obviously suppressing her anger. In addition, there were so many soldiers in her residence, and she was locked up with Lu Heng. The more Bien Ruahan thought about it, the more afraid she became. She almost cried on the spot. In the study, Lu Heng knelt down and saluted. Your Majesty came in person. This humble subject was unable to welcome Your Majesty. Please forgive this humble subject. Li Chitian sneered. Oh? Is Zhongibor's only crime? Lu Heng was very smart. He had been locked up for an entire afternoon, so he had already figured out the cause and effect. Naturally, he had also thought of countermeasures. Your Majesty, this humble subject has something to report. Li Chitian cast a sidelong glance at Lu Heng. She looked at him with an expression that said, "Let's see how you're going to act." She dragged her voice and said, "Play." Yes. This humble subject found out yesterday that Prince Zhongxian already knew the whereabouts of the treasure Your Majesty was looking for. He hid the treasure in stone and lured this humble subject to transport it. When the time came, he would steal the treasure. This humble subject was wholeheartedly preparing the stone to build the imperial mausoleum. I didn't expect that Prince Zhongshuren would take advantage of this opportunity to act. He took advantage of this loophole. Li Chitian narrowed her eyes. It was very obvious that she didn't believe all of Lu Heng's words. However, Li Chitian believed that Pang Xiao was involved and that Pang Xiao was part of this plan. Although Pang Zhishi pretended to be a benevolent and righteous person on the surface, in reality, only she, who had suffered a lot from him, knew how sinister this person was and how good he was at pretending to be a good person in front of civil and military officials and ignorant people. He had always been good at handling matters. When he did good, he would publicize it, but when he did evil, he would keep it a secret. Even if his secret was discovered, he had the ability to make people think that he had suffered a great grievance and had no choice but to do so. He was also good at war, and he was indeed good at commanding soldiers. There were as many soldiers and horses in Daeju as there were stupid and rough men who blindly worshipped Pang Zhishi. This annoyed Li Chitian the most. Now that Lu Heng had said so, how was he going to capture him and interrogate him properly? Anyway, he was determined to get the treasure. Even if Lu Heng was lying about the Pang Zhishi, he could use this as an excuse to get rid of a big problem. Thinking up to this point, Li Chitian had already made up his mind. In a low voice he said, "Do you know that the matter you are reporting involves the only prince of this dynasty with a different surname? Falsely accusing Wang Yi is a serious crime." Lu Heng's mind raced. He already understood Li Chitian's intentions. Presumably, if there were treasures, Prince Zhongshuren would not have revealed this information to this subject. Your Majesty, please investigate carefully. Of course, he knew which stones had treasures, but he just did not want Li Chitian to obtain them so easily. Although he knew that he would not be able to obtain the treasures, it did not prevent him from adding fuel to the fire. This would make Your Majesty hate Pang Zhishi even more in the midst of the trouble of finding the treasures. Li Chitian sneered. "We will naturally investigate." He stood up and looked down at Lu Heng, who was kneeling on the ground. Li Chitian said in a deep voice, "You should recuperate here for the next few days. Without our orders, you are not allowed to leave the city." "Yes. This subject thanks Your Majesty for his benevolence." Lu Heng bowed respectfully. Li Chitian immediately walked out quickly and instructed Xiong Jinshui, "Go to Danfu County and tell Prince Zhongshuren to come see us immediately." Ma Cheng, who was standing to the side, saw that Li Chitian's expression was not right and his heart trembled. He knew that Your Majesty wanted to summon Pang Xiao, so he knew that something bad was going to happen. He did not dare to show any concern for Pang Xiao and only stood there with his head lowered. Xiong Jinshui immediately complied and retreated. Danfu County. Pang Xiao had already received the news sent by the spies. Your Majesty must have rushed here because he knew about the treasures. Xie Yu sighed. I did not expect Dao Hanshan to be able to switch allegiance to Qian Ying and for Qian Ying to trust Dao Hanshan so much. Xu Weiji said, "This is Dao Hanshan's ability." Pang Xiao knew that Qin Yining had been unhappy over the past few days because of Sakurai's matter. Whenever he heard Dao Hanshan's name, he would feel suffocated. Thus, he did not continue this topic and changed the topic. "What is surprising is that Your Majesty did not do anything to Zhong Yibor. It is said that Zhong Yibor and his wife are under house arrest in Huichuan County. They can leave the residence, but they are not allowed to leave the county. I wonder how he managed to calm Your Majesty's anger. It is really curious." Xu Weiji said in a deep voice, "Wang Yi, this old man feels that this matter is not simple. Zhong Yibor might have pushed the blame to you." Chapter 1042. Wang Fei is right. Xie Yu nodded in agreement. It seemed that Wang Fei knew Zhong Yibor very well. But in front of Wang Yi, he couldn't say this carelessly. Xu Weiji frowned. If things develop as Wang Fei predicted, then it will be bad. Your Majesty has always tried to target Wang Yi without a reason. Now that he has a reason, how can he let it go so easily? Your Majesty is not stupid and will investigate the matter of the treasure. At that time, no matter whether or not our actions have been exposed, Your Majesty will push the blame on Wang Yi. The people present were all intelligent people. Naturally, they could guess that the current situation was developing in this direction. Qin Yining lowered his eyes and tapped the back of his hand with his fingertips. He said slowly, "When the emperor trampled on his own power, there was not a moment when he didn't care about Tianjiz's calculations. He pressed on step by step until the current situation was formed. Now that he is focused on the imperial mausoleum and the treasure, he can't see the natural disasters anymore. After pacifying the Dian and defeating the Taitan, he will be complacent. Now that he has found the location of the treasure, he will have no qualms about hiding the bow after the birds are killed. We should prepare in advance." Xie Yu and Xu Weiji nodded and looked at Pang Xiao questioningly. Pang Xiao had already pondered over this matter while they were talking. In this period of time, for the sake of the treasure at Wanning Dam, Qinghang Slope, and Linnan Village, I have sent most of the people I can use. Because of Dao Hanshan's letter, the last batch of people who were supposed to be sent to Wenju Town remained. However, this small number of people is not enough to protect all of us against thousands of soldiers and horses. The ceremonial guards that I have bestowed upon us by the emperor are also useless. They are all used as charging troops. It is too late to send more people." Pang Xiao turned to Qin Yining. So this time, before he could finish, Tang Xiu's slightly anxious voice came from outside the room. "Wang Yi, Your Majesty's eunuch Xiong is here." Everyone was shocked. They didn't expect Li Chitian to move so quickly. Pang Xiao gripped the armrests of the chair with both hands and slowly stood up. Then, he said, "Go and deal with them for a while. Just say that this king is taking a bath and will be back soon." "Yes." Tang Xiu immediately acknowledged and retreated. Pang Xiao abruptly turned around and looked at Qin Yining. Her eyes flashed with strong reluctance and unwillingness. Qin Yining vaguely understood what Pang Xiao meant. Xu Weiji and Xie Yu silently got up and left. Ji Yun also retreated to the door outside the screen and listened carefully to the movements outside. Qin Yining sat on the round-backed chair and looked up at Pang Xiao's eyes. She never knew that a person's eyes could contain such complex emotions. It made her heart ache. Qin Yining looked at Pang Xiao and felt a sharp pain in her heart. However, a beautiful smile appeared on her face. "Jishi, if you have any instructions, just say it. I'll listen." Pang Xiao's large hand caressed Qin Yining's fair cheek. The rough calluses on his thumb brushed past her earlobe. "You're a smart person. You understand the current situation even if I don't tell you. Your Majesty's companion is here. He must want me to meet him and denounce him. The situation is very dangerous for me. I might not be able to escape unscathed. If I bring you with me, it'll be like having one more person fall into the tiger's mouth. This will do more harm than good to both of us." So, looking at Qin Yining's gentle eyes, Pang Xiao couldn't make any requests. He knew that she wouldn't be willing to leave at such a critical moment. For so many years, they had been in the same boat as husband and wife. They had gone through so many dangers together. Qin Yining didn't even hide behind him like an ordinary woman. Instead, she would face the wind and rain in front of him and bear the burden for him. He wanted Qin Yining to be in a safe environment. He didn't want her to be in danger. However, he was worried that she wouldn't be willing. She would agree in front of him and do other things behind his back. Pang Xiao smiled and held Qin Yining's hand. Sister Yi, Sakurai's matter hasn't been resolved yet. You can go to Dongying and have a good talk with the famous Ishikawa Fusei. You can also meet Hiragana and ask if Sakurai has any unfulfilled wishes. You can deploy my men outside. If it doesn't work, we can use force to deter them. No matter what, we can give Sakurai a place to rest in peace. We can't let him wander outside forever. He saved you. We should also fulfill his wish. Qin Yining lowered her eyes and smiled. She knew that Pang Xiao was trying to use this matter to lure her away. It was indeed as Pang Xiao said. She was clear about the current situation. She also knew that if she went back with Pang Xiao, it would just be one more person entering the tiger's den. Seeing that Qin Yining didn't say anything, Pang Xiao was a little anxious. Sister Yi, listen to me. Now is not the time to be impulsive. We still have a long way to go. There's no need to throw everything away now. You know that this trip doesn't bode well. There's really no need for you to accompany me. I understand. Qin Yining pressed Pang Xiao's slightly cold fingers against her lips. As she stood up with a smile, Pang Xiao gradually stood up and looked down at her. Qin Yining said, I will leave with your men. I will take this opportunity to go to Dongying and resolve Sakurai's matter. Pang Xiao was dumbstruck. His phoenix-like eyes opened wide. Qin Yining looked at his surprised expression and couldn't help but think of Brother Zhao and Brother Han. The expressions of the two children when they were surprised were exactly the same as Pang Xiao's now. Her heart couldn't help but soften. I want to accompany you. Qin Yining looked at Pang Xiao and said with a smile, but I know that if I go with you, it's nothing more than sending a sheep into the tiger's den. Li Chitian can easily capture the two of us. If he uses me as a hostage to force you, you'll be in trouble. Moreover, your men are scattered outside. Without a leader, the threat they pose to him is limited. Since that's the case, why don't I lead your men outside and strengthen them? After obtaining the treasure, they will also be a threat to Li Chitian. At least, he won't dare to act rashly. At this moment, Qin Yining hated Li Chitian to the core. He wasn't even willing to address him as Your Majesty. Pang Xiao looked at Qin Yining. His expression gradually changed from surprise to a smile, and then to a hearty laugh. His eyes became more and more passionate. His emotions were like boiling lava in his heart, and a sense of heroism arose spontaneously. Just now, he had wanted to part with her temporarily, but his thoughts of having a child with her had already vanished. This was his woman. She was always able to bring him surprises. Although he loved her beauty and her occasional weakness, he loved her rational mind and strong soul more. This woman seemed to be an endless treasure that he could never dig out. He couldn't bear to let go of her. Sister Yi. Pang Xiao hugged her emotionally. Qin Yining smiled and rested his head on his shoulder. Don't worry. Even if you go this time, I will do my best to ensure that you'll be fine. Li Chitian's country is in turmoil, but he still doesn't know how to restrain himself. He still acts like this. There are many flaws. Chapter 1043. Qin Yining loved Pang Xiao's confident and domineering appearance the most. Whether it was to her or those who followed him, he was like a ray of sunshine, hot and bright, bringing them hope. So when he showed that kind of sympathy towards her, Qin Yining felt guilty. So, I won't accompany you to see Xiong Jinshui. I'll just stay here. With Xiong Jinshui's intelligence, he won't ask anything if he doesn't see me coming. Besides, he doesn't have the guts to search for me in the inner residence. Once he's in front of Your Majesty, it won't matter even if he waits. By then, I'll have already led people to the treasure. Qin Yining smiled freely. Pang Xiao smiled and tapped the tip of her nose. What a clever girl. The two of them huddled together and quickly discussed what to do next. Qin Yining said, "You should go quickly too. After all, he's your Majesty's head eunuch. It's not good to make him wait and annoy him. Some people don't taste sweet when they make candy, but sour when they make vinegar. It's better to be kind to others." "I understand. Then I'll go out." Pang Xiao looked at Qin Yining and retreated with his hands behind his back. Qin Yining maintained his smile and waved his hand at him. "Don't worry." The words "don't worry" made the two of them feel sad and reluctant at the same time. They missed each other, but how could they truly let go of their hearts? How many chances did they have in life that they could be sure to meet again after parting? Qin Yining's nose was sore, but he repeatedly told himself that he couldn't let Pang Xiao worry at this time. So he only smiled and said goodbye to him. Pang Xiao saw that the corners of her eyes seemed to be dyed with light pink rouge. She looked like she was about to cry, but she kept smiling at him. He understood what she meant. He gritted his teeth, turned around, and walked out in large strides. Pang Xiao came to the courtyard and took 2 deep breaths. His hatred for Li Chitian rose to an unprecedented level. If he hadn't done this time and time again, would they have been forced to separate again and again? How could they be so far apart from their families? He would end this sooner or later. "Mr. Xie, Mr. Shu." Pang Xiao saluted the 2 elders guarding the door. "Sister Yi will be entrusted to the 2 of you." Xie Yu and Shu Weiji were shocked. Just now, they were whispering outside who Wang Yi would bring to Huichuan. They did not expect that Wang Yi did not plan to bring either of them. "Wang Yi." Pang Xiao raised her hand and stopped Xie Yu. "I'm going to see His Majesty this time because the situation is not yet certain. I'll only bring a few guards and the ceremonial rites bestowed by Your Majesty. If necessary, we can quickly evacuate. If nothing unexpected happens, I will be content to remain under Your Majesty's eye. Sister Yi has to coordinate everything outside, and she has to go to the East Camp. It's inevitable that she can't do what she wants. Please help her." Both of them were extremely smart, so naturally, they immediately reacted. "Wang Yi intends to temporarily hand over the outside matters to Princess Consort?" "That's what I have in mind." Pang Xiao smiled and nodded. Xie Yu and Shu Weiji thought for a while and nodded in agreement. "That's good too. Princess Consort is intelligent and very keen on government affairs. She is also quite resourceful. I think Princess Consort can handle the outside matters well during this period." Shu Weiji also said, "With the 2 of us assisting her, Wang Yi can rest assured of Princess Consort's safety." In fact, both of them admired Qin Yining's intelligence. If Pang Xiao asked them to accompany Qin Yining to do something, they would agree. However, they were unwilling to acknowledge Qin Yining as their master and obey her commands. No matter how powerful Qin Yining was, she was still a woman. However, Pang Xiao was decisive in her actions. Once she made a decision, she wouldn't change it easily. Since she had spoken to them, it meant that she had made up her mind. Moreover, in the current situation, it was indeed the best for Wang Yi to lead Wang Yi's men outside to obtain the treasure and preserve their strength. It was also a strong check on Li Chitian's side. At least, it could make Li Chitian think twice before attacking Pang Xiao. It was better than Wang Yi and Princess Consort being trapped together. With the 2 of them, Princess Consort wouldn't cause any trouble. The 2 of them had worked together for many years. Most of the time, they could understand each other by exchanging glances. Without any objection, they accepted Pang Xiao's arrangement. "Wang Yi, you have to be more careful this time. It's best to preserve your strength. If you encounter a critical moment, you have to prioritize your own safety first." This old man also has the same idea. "Wang Yi, there is no harm in softening your stance. Your Majesty cherishes his reputation. He won't act rashly before investigating thoroughly. This period of time is just right for us to prepare. The 2 sirs are extremely right." Pang Xiao smiled and said, "Don't worry. This king will definitely act carefully." After the 2 of them received Pang Xiao's assurance, they relaxed and bowed, saying, "Wang Yi, take care. The two sirs, take care." Pang Xiao bid farewell to the two of them. Presumably, with them here, Qin Yining's actions would be smoother. At least, the subordinates who weren't familiar with Qin Yining wouldn't make private decisions like Dao Hanshan and hurt Qin Yining. At this time, Xiong Jinshui was sitting in the front hall and drinking tea. His expression was calm, without the slightest hint of anxiety. Because he was Your Majesty's subordinate, he was respected no matter where he went. Therefore, Wang Yi didn't immediately come out to meet him when he received the imperial edict today. This made Tang Xiu very uneasy. She stood in front of the door with her body tensed up. Her mind was churning with emotions, thinking about how she should deal with it if something were to happen. Right at this time, Tang Xiu saw Pang Xiao's slender figure striding over. For a moment, the nervousness in her heart disappeared. She hurriedly strode over to greet him and bowed, saying, "Wang Yi." Xiong Jinshui's ears were sharp. When he heard this voice, he quickly put down his teacup, stood up, and walked to the door. He bowed and said, "This servant pays respects to Wang Yi. Eunuch Xiong, there's no need to be so polite. It's this king's fault for making you wait for so long." Xiong Jinshui had been serving Li Chitian all day. At this time, there wasn't the slightest trace of water on Pang Xiao's body. His hair wasn't wet either. It was obvious that he hadn't bathed just now. However, this wasn't something that a eunuch like him could ask. If he was picky about this, Wang Yi could naturally say that he dried his hair before coming out. At that time, it would be unpleasant. Therefore, Xiong Jinshui didn't care about this. He smiled and said, "Wang Yi, Your Majesty ordered this servant to bring you back to Huichuan County." Pang Xiao's eyes widened in surprise. "Did Your Majesty arrange an errand for me?" To be honest, this king has been idle during this period of time. After his injuries gradually healed, he became more and more restless. If Your Majesty has an errand for this king, it's exactly what he wants. Xiong Jinshui carefully looked at Pang Xiao's expression. Seeing that his joy didn't seem to be fake, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart and said, "Wang Yi, this servant doesn't know what errand for Your Majesty. He only ordered you to quickly go and meet him. Wang Yi, please set off with this servant immediately." Meet him? Your Majesty went to Huichuan County to inspect the imperial mausoleum? Chapter 1044. Xiong Jinshui thought so, but he didn't dare to say anything. Your Majesty made all the decisions. He was just a small eunuch. It was already difficult for him to do his job well and save his life. How could he have the time to care about other things? No matter what Prince Zhongshiren thought or what arrangements he made, as long as Prince Zhongshiren followed him back to Huichuan County, he didn't care too much about it. It was fine as long as Prince Zhongshiren followed him back. As for Prince Zhongshiren, if he didn't reveal anything, he might be hated if something happened in the future. Or should he reveal a little of it without affecting the mission? Thinking of this, Xiong Jinshui smiled more sincerely. "Wang Yi, Your Majesty must have something to ask you. Your Majesty has always valued Wang Yi, so he might have arranged some errands for you." Pang Xiao had been in the court for many years, so he naturally understood what Xiong Jinshui meant. It seemed that his judgment was right. Your Majesty did want to ask him about the treasure. As for arranging errands for him, it was completely guessed by the eunuch in front of him because he knew that Zhong Ibor was under house arrest. He gave him hope because he was afraid that he wouldn't return to Huichuan County. Pang Xiao was very funny. He was indeed Your Majesty's companion. He was so cautious. "I see. Since Your Majesty ordered, then let's set off as soon as possible so that Your Majesty won't wait for too long." Xiong Jinshui was overjoyed when he heard this. He smiled and saluted. "Wang Yi is really loyal to Your Majesty. It's admirable." "Don't say that. Eunuch Xiong works hard for Your Majesty all day long." "That's admirable." The two of them politely complimented each other, and Pang Xiao ordered Tang Xiu to tell the guards to prepare for departure. Of course, Xiong Jinshui hoped to reach Huichuan County as soon as possible, so he didn't care about the fact that it was late. Even if it was late, he could just sleep for the night. However, when the group was ready to set off, Xiong Jinshui found that Pang Xiao didn't bring his family. Wang Yi, why didn't I see Princess Consort? Xiong Jinshui asked cautiously. Pang Xiao said, unfortunately, this king's health improved a few days ago. He had nothing to do, so the Qin clan took the servants out to play. Eunuch Xiong must have heard of her temper. She can't stay. I don't know where she took the people Princess Consort. This. Xiong Jinshui hesitated. He naturally knew that the Princess Consort was different from ordinary noblewomen. But if he didn't bring the princess back, he didn't know if the emperor would blame him. After all, Xiong Jinshui was well aware of why His Majesty had summoned His Highness. He couldn't help but suspect. Did Wang Yi know that the situation wasn't good, so he deliberately didn't take Princess Consort? After all, everyone knew that Prince Zhongshiren valued Princess Consort. They didn't have any other relatives, so they relied on each other. If Prince Zhongshiren knew something, it was possible for Princess Consort to escape. Xiong Jinshui had hundreds of guesses in his heart, but he only dared to think. He didn't dare to ask. Who was Prince Zhongshiren? He was a ruthless person who killed people without blinking. No matter what, he was just a eunuch. How could a servant dare to question Wang Yi? What's more, with Prince Zhongshan's status, the fact that he was willing to explain to him was already giving him enough face. He didn't dare to refuse the face that was given. Even though his heart was full of thoughts, it was just a breath. Pang Xiao saw Xiong Jinshui's attitude and asked in a low voice, "This king is also worried about Princess Consort. Is your Majesty anxious to see this king? If you aren't, this king can send people out to search. When the time comes, us husband and wife can see His Majesty together." Xiong Jinshui was so scared his whole body trembled. If they searched for too long and delayed the proper business, Your Majesty would swallow him alive. Wang Yi, Your Majesty originally wanted Wang Yi to see His Majesty. Newbie was just worried that Princess Consort would be anxious if she didn't find Wang Yi when she came back from her trip. So it's like this. This king misunderstood. Pang Xiao said with a smile. No matter. This king left servant girls to watch over the house. Princess Consort will know when she comes back. Wang Yi is thoughtful. It's Newbie who thought too much. Wang Yi, how about we depart now? Xiong Jinshui didn't want to offend this evil spirit. It was more important to finish the task quickly. Pang Xiao immediately nodded and said with a smile, of course. Then let's depart. Xiong Jinshui immediately nodded and greeted the dozens of soldiers from the 5 army barracks who came with him. Then he led Pang Xiao to the carriage outside the door. Wang Yi's ceremonial guards were just like when he entered the city. At this time, there was a huge and long line. When the people of Danfu County heard the news, they all gathered around to watch. At this time, the streets and corners were crowded with people. Seeing Wang Yi being helped out by a middle-ranking official, the people couldn't help but whisper to each other. There was even a hothead who asked at the top of his voice, Wang Yi, are you going back to the capital? When someone asked, another person immediately echoed, is Wang Yi going back to handle some matters for Your Majesty? Wang Yi is going to leave just like that. Will you still return to Danfu County? The people asked sincerely. They really couldn't bear to part with Pang Xiao. Compared to when Qin Yining secretly investigated this place, the people now treated Pang Xiao and his siblings as if Pang Xiao was their parent. And the people's love and respect for Pang Xiao made Xiong Jinshui's heart skip a beat. He didn't expect Prince Zhongshiren to be able to make the people of Danfu County respect him so much in such a short time. This was indeed a kind of ability. Xiong Jinshui didn't dare to slight Pang Xiao. Prince Zhongshiren had the kind of temperament that made people believe in him. Sometimes, even Your Majesty can't compare to this. As soon as this dangerous thought popped up, Xiong Jinshui quickly extinguished it. After Pang Xiao waved goodbye to the people, he helped Pang Xiao into the carriage. Then, the long ceremonial procession slowly left the county under the escort of dozens of cavalrymen from the 5 armies. The people lined the streets to send them off. Because of Pang Xiao's magnanimity and protection, they were now able to avoid punishment. Pang Xiao was their benefactor. When their benefactor was about to leave, Many people spontaneously came to send him off. Some people even brought shoes, socks, dried food, salted vegetables, and other things from their own homes and stuffed them into the hands of the generals in the procession. Xiong Jinshui was deeply shocked by such a lively scene. It also attracted the attention of many people. Just as Pang Xiao's procession left the city gate, Qin Yining, Ji Yun, Xie Yu, and Xu Weiji also brought a few people from the Qingtian alliance, as well as the guards that Pang Xiao left for Qin Yining. After changing their appearances, they quietly left the prince's mansion through a small alley. They walked in the opposite direction and left Danfu County through another city gate. "Madam, where are we going now?" Yuan Yun was wearing an old, dark green vest made of fine cotton. Her skin was slightly darker, and her cheeks were flushed. She looked like a girl from the countryside. Qin Yining was wearing a dark blue cotton jacket and an 8-piece skirt of the same color. His hair was combed into a simple bun. Xie Yu's cream was applied to his face, neck, and hands. His skin had turned sallow, and he looked sickly. He was completely different from before. Chapter 1045. Qin Yining had the experience of disguising himself and going out. This time, he disguised himself as a sickly woman and went to Golden Harbor to seek treatment. It was a walk in the park for Qin Yining. Xie Yu and Xu Weiji disguised themselves as an accountant, while the other disguised themselves as a butler. The rest of the guards disguised themselves as manservants, coachmen, and guards. They left Danfu County's territory, but they still did not dare to slack off. "Madam, I've already confirmed that there are no tails." Jingzhe came forward and said. Qin Yining finally relaxed and nodded. "It's getting late. Let's find a place nearby to set up camp and rest. After confirming that no one is following us, we'll turn and head southeast." "Madam is still the most cautious." Xie Yu smiled. "We're going to Golden Harbor, but we're going southwest first. Even if someone is following us, they won't know which direction we're heading in. We have to be cautious." Qin Yining stretched his stiff legs from sitting in the carriage. It was already nightfall, and the last ray of sunlight was slowly disappearing behind the horizon. Jinghu Wei, Qingtian Alliance, and the silver-masked secret agents were busy setting up the fire and setting up the tents. Qin Yining, Xie Yu, and Xu Weiji walked to the side to talk. To be honest, this old man initially thought that Madam would not agree to Master's arrangement. She was determined to follow Master. Xu Weiji sighed. Qin Yining smiled. "I did want to follow him. But thinking about it was one thing, and reality was another. At this crucial moment, I can't let my emotions affect my decisions. He values my thoughts very much. If I get emotional, it's very likely that it will affect his judgment." Qin Yining stopped and sighed softly. "Even though I'm already like this in reality, I don't want to become his weakness." Xie Yu and Xu Weiji were moved when they heard this. Ji Yun looked at Qin Yining's back and felt a lump in her throat. She had followed Qin Yining all these years and had personally seen her and Wang Yi go through ups and downs to get to where they were today. Their feelings had moved her, but she also knew that in the eyes of outsiders, Wang Fei, who was glamorous and beautiful, had actually suffered a lot and experienced many storms. The hardships and sufferings that she had suffered were things that many people had never seen in their entire lives. Such a princess consort deserved the best treatment. They, the servants, were too useless. Xie Yu sighed and said, "Madam is right. Your emotions can indeed influence Wang Yi's decision. It's not just your emotions, your safety, and your thoughts that can influence Wang Yi. That's why Dao Hanshan wanted to kill me. Because as a woman, I became an uncertain factor in Wang Yi's success." Qin Yining laughed at herself and recalled what Tian Jizi had said when she brought people to kill her. Tian Jizi had always said that her existence was the biggest variable. Many things that she had clearly predicted would change because of her existence. This time, she felt that it was too ironic for her to say such words. Xie Yu comforted her. "Dao Hanshan is too stubborn. Madam, don't take his words to heart. You were able to decisively take us away from Master's side this time, which means that Dao Hanshan was wrong." Qin Yining smiled and said, What's the point of dying together with him? What I want is for everyone to be able to live. Turning around and walking towards the bonfire, Qin Yining said in high spirits, I'll lead people to develop outside. We'll definitely be able to suppress that person. This way, Master will have more chances of being safe. A short period of time is nothing. How can we only look at the present when doing things? She said this very smoothly because she had been telling herself this the entire time. She repeatedly reminded herself that she didn't want to let the emotions of parting affect her and the morale of the people around her. What's more, if Pang Xiao was really killed, would she, as his wife, only blindly commit suicide to show her love for him? Who would avenge his death? Who would take care of his family and their children? Death was the easiest. She didn't have to care about anything else once she closed her eyes. Living and shouldering the responsibility of living was what she should do. As for the day of parting, she believed that Pang Xiao would be willing to wait for her. Moreover, they were all doing their best to prevent such a tragedy from happening. Qin Yining picked up a tree branch and fiddled with the bonfire, leading the conversation in a relaxed direction. When the atmosphere in the campsite became lively, Qin Yining told Liao Zhibing, this time, we'll need a lot of experienced people who know how to sail the boat. When we reach Golden Harbor, contact the local brothers to keep an eye out. Liao Zhibing smiled and nodded, understood, Alliance Master. Just as Qin Yining's group successfully took a detour to Golden Harbor, Pang Xiao's honor guard also arrived at Huichuan County at the fastest speed. When Xiong Jinshui saw Huichuan County from afar, he heaved a sigh of relief. God knows how afraid he was that Pang Xiao would suddenly escape halfway through the mountain path. Your Majesty would skin him alive. However, it seemed unlikely that Wang Yi had hidden the treasure. Otherwise, with Wang Yi's martial arts skills, there would be many opportunities for him to escape. Xiong Jinshui ordered someone to pass the message to the city gate, and the soldiers surrounding Huichuan County also saw Wang Yi's honor guard. Many of the cavalrymen had followed Ma Cheng to Danfu County last time, and many of them regarded Pang Xiao as the god of war in their hearts. Therefore, when they heard that Prince Zhengxian had arrived, they were all very excited. However, due to the order, everyone stood still and did not dare to move. Pang Xiao lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked at the county that was getting closer and closer. He ordered the troops to speed up. At this moment, a group of cavalrymen suddenly rushed out of the city gate, divided into two rows, and rushed in his direction. Pang Xiao was stunned, and immediately ordered the troops to stop. Dust flew under the hooves of the horses, and the whole group was soon surrounded by the cavalrymen. When Ma Cheng came closer and saw Pang Xiao in the carriage, he felt complicated and guilty. He also felt helpless that he had to obey the imperial edict. He got off the horse, cupped his hands, and saluted, I'm here to bring Wang Yi into the city under the imperial edict. Thank you, Commander Ma. Pang Xiao could see that he was in a difficult position, so he immediately smiled and signaled to Tang Xiu. Tang Xiu immediately went forward to help Ma Cheng. Ma Cheng saw that Wang Yi did not blame him at all, and his heart suddenly warmed. He said with mixed feelings, Wang Yi, Your Majesty is at the Yamen, please invite Wang Yi into the city. Lead the way. Yes. He was supposed to be escorting, but after Pang Xiao met with Ma Cheng, he quietly led the way. Although on the surface, it looked like Pang Xiao entered the city surrounded by the cavalrymen of the 5 military camps, Xiong Jinshui, who was among them, could naturally see the difference. He was indeed loyal to Your Majesty, but who would dare to offend such a Prince Zhengxian? He believed that even now, if Prince Zhengxian really killed him, Your Majesty would not say anything. Even if Your Majesty was willing to stand up for him, could he be resurrected after losing his life? Xiong Jinshui immediately thought about where he should stand. He also had a plan in his mind about what Your Majesty said. Chapter 1046. In recent days, Huichuan County was in a state of panic. The commoners didn't know what had happened, but the sudden arrival of the troops and the emperor's entourage had made them extremely nervous and panicked. Now, when people lined up on the street to buy rice, they saw Prince Zhengxian's entourage being escorted into the city by the troops. Thinking that this Wang Yi was once in charge of supervising the construction of the imperial mausoleum, the commoners had their own guesses. This Wang Yi was most likely implicated by the imperial mausoleum. For the sake of the imperial mausoleum, many lives were lost inside. There were also those who were well informed or had been to the capital before Pang Xiao came to Huichuan County. They knew the rumors in the capital at that time and secretly discussed it. They were quite insightful and said, "What do you know?" Perhaps Wang Yi's job of supervising the construction of the imperial mausoleum was deliberately arranged by someone with ulterior motive. Pang Xiao didn't care about these at all. He came to the magistrate's office amidst the crowd's discussion. He slowly got off the carriage and went to the backyard accompanied by Xiong Jinshui and Ma Cheng. At this time, Li Qitian was reading the memorial from the capital. "Reporting to Your Majesty, Prince Zhengshuren is here." Li Qitian's eyes stopped reading the memorial. He calmly put down the memorial and said, "Let him in." "As you wish." Not long after, Pang Xiao, who was wearing a silver-white brocade robe with arrow sleeves and a jade belt around his waist, entered the door accompanied by 8 imperial bodyguards. Li Qitian sat at the head of the table and narrowed his eyes as he looked at Pang Xiao. That person walked over with large strides. He was so young and handsome that it made Li Qitian's heart feel even more stifled. "This humble subject pays his respects to Your Majesty." Pang Xiao respectfully bowed. Li Qitian didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Pang Xiao with a scrutinizing gaze. It seemed that Pang Xiao's time in Danfu County was much more comfortable than his. While he was working hard for the country, Pang Xiao was enjoying himself. In the end, Pang Xiao stole his treasure effortlessly. Li Qitian, who was originally able to suppress his anger, suddenly slammed the table and angrily rebuked, "Dawn of Annihilation. Do you know your crime?" Pang Xiao bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, please calm down." "Calm down? You deceived and used me, yet you still want me to quell my anger. This subject does not understand Your Majesty's meaning. Your Majesty, if I have made a mistake, please enlighten me." Li Qitian's chest heaved violently. He was so angry that he laughed. "Since you want me to make it clear, I will make it clear to you. Where did you hide the treasure? If you tell me, I can save myself some trouble." Pang Xiao straightened up in a daze. He did not even care about the rule of not looking directly at Tian Yang. He said in astonishment, "Your Majesty said treasure? Is it the treasure from the Yang dynasty?" This person was actually still putting on an act. Of course. Li Qitian stood up angrily. He strode over to Pang Xiao and said condescendingly, "I treated you like a brother and treated you well. But you repeatedly violated the rules. This time, you knew that the great Zhu dynasty needed this batch of treasures. But you still hid them in private. How can you live up to the feelings of being sworn brothers with me in the past?" Pang Xiao seemed to be angered by Li Qitian's angry roar. His sword-like eyebrows furrowed and a vertical line appeared between his eyebrows. "Your Majesty, why do you say that? This subject has always been recuperating in Danfu County. I have never stepped out of Danfu County. How could I know about the treasure? His Majesty said that I was the one who hid the treasure. Where did you hear such nonsense from? As a subject, my family is now extinct. My fief is enough for this subject. Why would this subject hide the treasure? Besides, the treasure from the Yang dynasty must not be a small amount. If this subject moved the treasure, how could this subject not alert others? Who told Your Majesty about this? Someone must have framed you." The more Pang Xiao argued, the louder his voice became. In the end, he was almost shouting. Li Qitian knew that Pang Xiao looked like a careless person. However, he was a very cautious person. So, he wouldn't yell and shout in front of Li Qitian for a long time. But he had lost his composure because of this matter. As for why he was so angry, did it mean that he had been wrongly accused? Li Qitian began to have doubts about Lu Heng's words. Lu Heng's actions that day were still clear as if they were right in front of his eyes. Li Qitian carefully thought back and found that Lu Heng seemed to be overly calm at the time. Compared to Pang Xiao's current loss of composure, the two of them acted like Pang Xiao was more believable to Li Qitian. However, Li Chitian was more willing to believe Lu Heng's words. You still want to quibble? Because of our many years of brotherhood, we are not willing to directly send down an imperial decree to arrest you. We only called you here to personally ask you. You still refuse to speak the truth. Do you want us to open a court to interrogate you or hand you over to the 3 law departments before you speak the truth? Then your Majesty can just hand this subject over to the 3 law department. Pang Xiao straightened his neck and said in a hurt manner, this subject is loyal and devoted to your Majesty. Because of our friendship in the past when we fought for the country together, although I serve your Majesty as my master, I treat your Majesty as my older brother in my heart. I did not expect that your Majesty would believe other people's nonsense and accuse this subject without any evidence. Why should this subject admit to something I did not do? What treasure do you want this subject to hand over? This subject did not hide it at all. What can I hand over? Good. Good. You did not hide it. You are wrongly accused. Li Chitian sneered and turned around. He strode back to the table and sat down heavily. The hand wearing the jade thumb ring clenched into a fist. If you refuse to speak the truth now, we will have you go to the 3 law departments to speak. Fine, I'll go. Pang Xiao actually stood up and said with a red face, this is simply ridiculous. Your Majesty is the older brother, yet you suspect your younger brother like this? Even if you want to convict me, there should at least be witnesses and material evidence. But now, there is nothing and you are forcing this subject to confess. This subject has never seen any treasure, so how can I confess? How can I say where it is? Your Majesty is simply ridiculous. You. Li Chitian was furious and slammed the table. Do you still have us, the Emperor, in your eyes? If you were not the Emperor, I would have beaten you long ago. Look at yourself. Do you still have the appearance of an older brother? Impudent. Come, drag this insolent fellow away for us. Give him 20 planks and teach him what rules are. The imperial bodyguards standing inside and outside the room had long been scared into silence. They had followed Li Chitian for many years, but this was the first time they had seen an official dare to quarrel with your Majesty. Now, your Majesty was so angry that he wanted to flog Wang Yi. They all felt embarrassed. Prince Zhongshuren did not say anything wrong, but he pinned the blame on others without any evidence and even forced them to ask about the whereabouts of the treasure. How could they say anything? Your Majesty has really lost his head over the treasure these days. They just did not know if your Majesty would regret flogging Wang Yi now. What if Wang Yi bore a grudge against them and wanted to take revenge in the future? Several imperial bodyguards came forward to hold Pang Xiao's arms and dragged him out. Pang Xiao was still angry and shouted, Your Majesty wronged a loyal subject. Without any evidence, you want to convict this subject of a crime and punish a loyal subject for no reason. This subject is not convinced. Chapter 1047. Pang Xiao's arms were held by 2 imperial bodyguards, one on the left and one on the right. In fact, in terms of martial arts, he could easily get rid of the restraint. But at this time, although he shouted I don't accept, he didn't struggle at all. Seeing him like this, the imperial bodyguards couldn't help but sigh. Prince Zhongshuren was really loyal to your Majesty. They knew that with their own weight, they would not be able to last more than 2 rounds in front of the prince, but the prince was willing to be restrained by them. It could only be said that although he did not accept the punishment given by the emperor, he did not have the intention to disobey. For the sake of the treasure, His Majesty had gone crazy. While everyone was sighing in their hearts, the eunuchs had already moved a stool over. The imperial bodyguards pushed Pang Xiao to lie down and pressed his legs down. Pang Xiao still didn't struggle. He just raised his head and said loudly, Your Majesty falsely accused a loyal subject. For the treasure, he even disregarded his brotherhood. This subject was loyal to the country and risked his life. Your Majesty listened to the slanderous words of a lowly person and beat this subject without any evidence. This subject didn't know about the treasure at all. Even if Your Majesty beat this subject to death today, this subject wouldn't be able to say where the treasure is hidden. Pang Xiao shouted loudly. It seemed that he was incoherent because of anger. But the meaning of these words was very clear. In order to find the treasure, Your Majesty listened to someone's slanderous words and believed that it was Prince Zhengshuren who hid the treasure. Now, he didn't even care about the Brotherhood and Prince Zhengshuren's numerous meritorious deeds. He actually wanted to beat him in public. Wang Yi was pressed down and beaten with a board. This kind of humiliation was simply unheard of. Pang Xiao's angry roar spread far and wide. Even the guards standing guard outside the yamen and the occasional passerby could hear it clearly. Li Qitian angrily rebuked, "Why haven't you shut his mouth yet?" The imperial bodyguards didn't dare to disobey and could only use a clean handkerchief to stuff Pang Xiao's mouth. The eunuchs who carried out the punishment brought the board and stood on the left and right. They looked at Your Majesty with weak hands and feet. "Beat him. Beat him hard," Li Qitian roared. "As Your Majesty commands." The eunuchs didn't dare to be negligent. They gritted their teeth and raised the board. Then there was the sound of the board cracking. The eunuchs didn't dare to kill Wang Yi's life. And the board hit on Pang Xiao's buttocks. Soon, blood burst out on Pang Xiaoti's silver outer's robe. It of Pang Xiao's. It looked really of Pang Xiao's silver robe. Of Pan Pang of S of Jiao of SSSSS Pan SSE of Ovs. This Wang Yi, who shed his blood for the establishment of Daju's dynasty, who destroyed northern Ji and pacified Dian, the god of war, who made those who opposed Daju tremble at the thought of him, was actually being beaten for a groundless crime. This made everyone's hearts turn cold. It also made everyone see Your Majesty's coldness. Even if they had been loyal to Your Majesty for many years and were Your Majesty's sworn brothers, they would still be beaten when it came to matters of personal interest. What about them? Li Qitian looked down at Pang Xiao's body with the board. He saw that his outer robe was stained with blood. He felt unprecedentedly refreshed. What about the Ziwei Emperor star that Tian Jizi calculated? Didn't he still have to bow down to him? Didn't he still have the power to decide his life and death with just one word? So what if he was loved and respected by the people and respected by the soldiers? Wasn't he still able to hold him down and beat him with just one word? If he wanted him to live, he would live. If he wanted him to die, he could take his head with just one word. He was the true son of heaven. So what if those people who misled the public with their lies made up and sent out random calculations? Li Qitian's anger was replaced by pride. At this moment, he felt refreshed. He had never felt so carefree in recent years. He couldn't help but think that if he had known that beating Pang Xiao with the board could relieve the depression in his heart, he would have beaten him up long ago. The sound of the board hitting his buttocks stopped for a moment. Pang Xiao lay on the bench, his head drooping weakly. His long hair was scattered on the ground, and his arms were hanging down. He had already lost feeling in them. The large bloodstains on his buttocks were really glaring. His situation was so miserable that it made the hearts of the bodyguards on the side ache. The god of war, who made the enemies tremble in fear on the battlefield, actually fell into such a situation. Li Qitian walked up to Pang Xiao coldly. He crossed his arms and looked at Pang Xiao's weak appearance. "Do you know what you did wrong?" Pang Xiao hung his head and didn't respond. Li Qitian didn't think that Pang Xiao would be knocked unconscious by 20 boards. In the past, on the battlefield, he could still break the arrows and continue to fight after being hit by 2 arrows. Now, it was only 20 boards. How serious would it be? "Pang Zhishi." Li Qitian raised his voice. But Pang Xiao still didn't move. The imperial bodyguard on the side hastily squatted down and lifted Pang Xiao's drooping head up. He removed the handkerchief from Pang Xiao's mouth. Only then did he realize that Pang Xiao's forehead was covered with sweat, and the handkerchief was stained with blood. "Your Majesty, Wang Yi has fainted." Li Qitian was suspicious. He lowered his head and lifted Pang Xiao's face to check. The bodyguards on the side frowned when they saw his rough movements. "He really fainted." Li Qitian frowned doubtfully. Then he said in a low voice, "Ask the imperial physician to treat him. Carry him out." "Yes." The bodyguards hurriedly carried Pang Xiao out with a stool. The imperial bodyguards had mixed feelings when they saw Wang Yi being carried out like this. His blood-stained robe was really dazzling. Tang Xiu and other Jinghu Wei, who came back with Pang Xiao, were blocked outside the door. When they saw Pang Xiao being carried out, they all rushed forward and cried with tears in their eyes, Wang Yi, wake up." The scene was so miserable that it made people's noses ache. Li Chitian felt disappointed. He didn't get to ask about the whereabouts of the treasure, but Pang Xiao provoked him so much that he couldn't hold back his anger and gave him a beating. However, it was also a good thing to have the opportunity to control Pang Xiao by his side. Sitting behind the desk, Li Chitian clasped his hands and gradually calmed down. Lu Heng and Pang Xiao, which one of them was telling the truth? Was the treasure hidden, or was it still mixed in with the other stones? Li Chitian had already ordered his trusted subordinates to track down the stones in the other 9 directions. However, the mountain was high and the road was long. He couldn't get the information immediately. He was really anxious. Seeing that there was finally a trace of the treasure that he couldn't find, but the fat meat in front of him was lost, he was anxious and angry. While Li Chitian was frowning and thinking, the news that Prince Zhongshuren was beaten for no reason had already spread. For a time, the city was in a state of panic. First, Huichuan County was surrounded by soldiers and horses. Then, the county magistrate was put under house arrest. Then, Wang Yi was escorted into the city and beaten in the blink of an eye. "Your Majesty is here to make a big move. What does he want to do?" The line to buy grain was 4 rows long and snaked out for 2 streets. "The price of grain has risen again today. Is your Majesty going to do something about it? Why is a loyal official like Prince Zhongshuren beaten?" A man with a burlap sack muttered in a low voice. Chapter 1048. I didn't see your Majesty do anything for us when we don't have rice to eat, but he beat the person who found a way to get rice for us with a plank. This is too. Do you want to die? The man's words were interrupted by a kind-hearted person behind him. That person patted the man's arm and said, "Don't talk about this. Tell someone to listen carefully. Don't tell me your family doesn't want to live anymore." The man knew that he had misspoken and could only shut his mouth gloomily. However, even though someone stopped the discussion here, the discussion in other places gradually spread to every corner of the city. Li Chitian still didn't know how the situation had developed, but Lu Heng had already received the news. Although Lu Heng was ordered not to leave Huichuan County, he was still free to move around. However, when he went in and out, he had to be accompanied by the bodyguards arranged by Your Majesty. He usually didn't like to walk around outside, but recently, because he didn't receive any news from his subordinates, he really liked to wander around and see the various situations in the city. At the same time, he also liked to observe the situation. Therefore, when Lu Heng heard that Pang Zhishi was taken to the Yamen and beaten by Your Majesty as soon as he arrived in Huichuan County, he was shocked at first. Then, he couldn't help but want to raise the corners of his lips. Has Your Majesty gone crazy because of the treasure? He doesn't even care about his reputation anymore. When he was in the capital, Pang Zhishi already had an excellent reputation. Storytellers on the streets and alleys were talking about his heroic deeds. At one point, he was promoted as the hero of the Daeju dynasty. Now that the hero was being treated like this by Your Majesty, how would the common people feel if they knew? Lu Heng shook his head and controlled the expression on his face. However, in his heart, he was constantly imagining the scene of Pang Zhishi being beaten. He only felt very comfortable from head to toe. I wonder how Qin Yining would feel if Pang Zhishi was beaten? Thinking of Qin Yining, Lu Heng's smiling eyes dimmed again. As a man, he naturally didn't ask about Pang Xiao's family. When he returned home, he saw Bian Ruohan. While chatting, he brought up the matter of Pang Xiao being beaten. Bian Ruohan had been scared out of his wits when they were under house arrest for the past few days. He had put away his usual arrogance and willfulness. Lu Heng didn't have the time to argue with Bian Ruohan. Therefore, the two of them got along harmoniously like never before. That's what Master Bo said. This concubine also heard about it. Bien Ruohan nimbly tied a knot and said with a smile, I thought the Qin clan and Prince Zhongshuan were deeply in love. This time, Prince Zhongshuan was obviously summoned by your majesty to denounce him. However, the Qin clan was traveling with their people and refused to come. Hearing this, Lu Heng stilled and clearly didn't immediately react. Bien Ruohan raised his eyes and carefully observed Lu Heng's expression. Seeing him like this, he secretly thought that this was a perfect opportunity. He immediately added fuel to the fire. Today, when I went to visit the jewelry stalls, I heard people say that Prince Zhongshuan didn't bring Wang Fei with him when he came back this time. The person in charge of Wang Yi's honor said that when Prince Zhongshuan was seriously injured, Wang Fei took people to travel. It can be seen that all the affection she appears to have for Wang Yi is fake. She raised her eyes to look at Lu Heng. Her soft voice carried obvious urgency and desire. Master Bo, the Qin clan is such a cold-hearted woman. Prince Zhongshuan dotes on her so much. In times of danger, she can even abandon him. What about other unrelated people? So don't think about that bitch anymore. The Qin clan doesn't care about you at all. I'm the woman by your side who cares about you the most. Lu Heng quietly listened to Bien Ruohan's persuasion, but his thoughts were completely different from what Bien Ruohan had said. He naturally knew what kind of person Qin Yining was. She was so infatuated and stubborn. She had survived many dangerous situations with Pang Xiao. He cherished her loyalty and stubbornness, and his jealousy towards Pang Xiao grew with each passing day. With Qin Yining's personality, if Pang Xiao was in danger, she definitely wouldn't ignore it. She must have left to do something important in private. Qin Yining's ability was not inferior to a man's. If he wanted to guess what she was going to do, it was too broad. Lu Heng couldn't figure it out at the moment. However, the word treasure quickly flashed through his mind. What he said to Li Chitian was just to clear his name. He took advantage of Li Chitian's fear of Pang Xiao and purposely used Pang Xiao as an excuse. However, Qin Yining was uncharacteristically separated from Pang Xiao. She didn't go through thick and thin with Pang Xiao. What was it that was worth Qin Yining's attention recently? Lu Heng easily thought of the treasure. According to Lu Heng's judgment, the treasure would eventually fall into Your Majesty's hands. Your Majesty had enough manpower to split the army into 9 groups to investigate it one by one. Although Pang Xiao had prestige in the army, he didn't have many people under his command. He started out as a bumpkin, so he didn't have as deep a foundation and connections as the Lu family. If it was Pang Zhishi who was discovered by Your Majesty to be hiding the treasure, he would probably be immediately condemned with great fanfare. However, when Your Majesty discovered that he was hiding the treasure, he was only temporarily placed under house arrest to give him enough time to react. This was the advantage of having the Lu family as a powerful backer. Lu Heng's mind was spinning. In the time it took to drink tea, he had already analyzed the crux of the problem. Bien Ruohan saw that Lu Heng's expression didn't change. He didn't show any disdain or disgust for Qin Yining. Disappointment and resentment flooded her like a tidal wave. Why? Why? What was so good about the Qin clan that made Lu Heng so infatuated with her? Even when she did such a heartless thing, Lu Heng did not take it to heart. She was Lu Heng's first wife. She was the one who had gone through thick and thin with him. However, Lu Heng was always thinking about a married woman. Bien Ruohan still had a bit of rationality left. She knew that the two of them were being closely watched. If they really got into a fight, Your Majesty would probably hear about it. Otherwise, she really wanted to grab Lu Heng's collar and shake it. She wanted to ask him what was wrong with her. Why didn't he want to see her more? Li Chitian only realized that Qin Yining didn't come with Pang Xiao after he gave Pang Xiao a beating. After hearing Xiong Jinshui's report, Li Chitian laughed mockingly. Do you really think we're stupid? What do you mean going out to play? Do you think that everyone in the court doesn't know about the relationship between the two of them? Pang Zhishi is someone who can defy an imperial edict for the sake of the Qin clan. Xiong Jinshui bowed to the side. When he heard this, his heart was in his throat. He was afraid that Your Majesty would vent her anger on him if she was unhappy. Li Chitian turned to look at the head eunuch beside him. Do you really think that the Qin clan is going out to play? Xiong Jinshui didn't have time to think too much at this time. He was only thinking about how to make Your Majesty happy. He casually said, Your Majesty is far-sighted. He must have thought of this a long time ago. This servant is just sharing this servant's small opinion. Prince Zhongshiren is someone who loves his wife the most. He most likely hid the princess consort away a long time ago. Oh! Why would he hide her for no reason? Xiong Jinshui choked. He immediately forced a smile and said, This servant doesn't know. Perhaps Prince Zhongshiren's family has already died out. Both the old and young are gone. He only has this wife left, so he wants to keep a family member. Family member? Li Chitian's train of thought was immediately led astray. Chapter 1049. After today's confrontation with Pang Xiao, Li Chitian had already dispelled some of his suspicions. He knew that there might be more to the matter of the treasure. And if Pang Xiao hadn't touched the treasure and had obediently recuperated in Danfu County, he naturally didn't need to worry about the emperor's anger. He also didn't need to hide his wife in advance to avoid being implicated. If Pang Zhishi knew that he was no longer welcome and would be dealt with sooner or later, then this wasn't the first time he had revealed this. Ever since he was impeached for the 10 major crimes and continuously disobeyed imperial edicts, he should have been aware of this. However, at that time, he didn't hide the Qin clan. This meant that he hoped that the Qin clan would live and die with him and never be separated. And now, the Qin clan was hidden by him. There must have been some changes in the Qin clan that made Pang Zhishi unwilling to let her live and die with him. Therefore, the most likely possibility was that the Qin clan was pregnant again. A faint smile appeared on Li Chitian's lips, and the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes rose slightly. Someone come. Your Majesty. As soon as Li Chitian gave the order, a black shadow immediately flew down from the roof and knelt on one knee. Go, arrange for someone to investigate the whereabouts of Prince Zhongshiren's consort. Once you find her, immediately put her under house arrest. Remember, don't endanger her life. As you command. The shadow guard cupped his hands and quickly retreated. Xiong Jinshui lowered his head. He was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. He secretly sighed in relief, glad that he had escaped a disaster. He only hoped that when the princess consort was arrested in the future, no one would know that it was because of his words. Pang Xiao had a high fever that night. After the imperial physician treated him, he reported back to Li Chitian, trembling with fear. Prince Zhongshiren's injuries haven't healed yet. His qi and blood have been depleted, and new injuries have been added, which has affected his foundation. Wait for this humble subject to prescribe a prescription and carefully recuperate. You must not overwork yourself so that you can recover. Li Chitian smiled and said kindly, Come closer. The imperial physician did not dare to disobey. He moved closer to the emperor and listened to a few instructions. The imperial physician's face immediately turned pale with fright. His legs were so weak that he almost couldn't stand. What? We ordered you to treat Prince Zhongshiren. Is it difficult? I don't think it's difficult. Fine beads of sweat appeared on the imperial physician's forehead. Li Chitian said with a satisfied smile, Very good. You've done your job well. Magistrate Liu has already sent a letter asking for advice. Your medical skills are not bad. I feel that you will be of great use. Yes, this humble subject will definitely treat Prince Zhongshiren and nurse Wang Yi back to health. Yes. I'm glad you understand. Li Chitian's smile deepened. Then, as if he had thought of something, he asked, I still do not know your name. Your humble servant is Gao Yongnian. All right, Gao Yongnian, we will remember. You may leave. Gao Yongnian's clothes were soaked with sweat. He almost cried on the spot. Trembling, he retreated. He wiped his sweat in the corridor and couldn't help but feel sad when he thought of his family. How did he get involved in this kind of trouble? It was true that no matter how hard one tried to guard against it, one could not guard against fate. If he had known earlier, he would have fallen seriously ill and not traveled with your majesty. While Pang Xiao was recuperating, Jiao Yongyan's face was wrinkled like a bitter gourd. It was as if he was aging prematurely. However, Wang Yi was very willful. He refused to drink medicine and was unwilling to cooperate when the medicine was applied. When he was angry, he would even hit people. An injured tiger was still a tiger. Jiao Yongyan was almost scared out of his wits by Wang Yi. Pa, pa, pa. What kind of plaything is this? Are you trying to make this king suffer to death? When Pang Xiao poured the third bowl of medicine on Jiao Yongyan's body, the temperature of the medicine seeped through his robes and made Jiao Yongyan quiver. He finally came to his senses. Wang Yi might not be willful, but he was just too smart. Lowering his head to look at his body, Jiao Yongyan had a flash of inspiration and repeatedly apologized. When he turned around, his hands and body were covered in blisters. Before he could serve Wang Yi well, he was scalded by Wang Yi's rage and had a high fever. Li Chitian was furious when he found out, but he couldn't argue with a mere imperial physician. He also didn't want more people to know about this matter. Besides, he only brought one imperial physician with him. His plan could only be put aside for the time being. He turned around and instructed Xiong Jinshui, "You should also take good care of Wang Yi's food." Xiong Jinshui's heart skipped a beat and he hurriedly nodded in agreement. In the next few days, Prince Zhengshiren's fever didn't subside because of the lack of an imperial physician's treatment. He didn't eat a single grain of rice and almost couldn't drink water. Wang Yi's personal guards were so anxious that they couldn't stop crying. They knelt on the street in front of the yamen and cried and begged. "Your Majesty, I beg your Majesty to show mercy and allow this lowly one to invite a doctor from the city to take a look at Wang Yi. Wang Yi has been loyal to the country for many years and his body is already covered in scars. This time, his illness is serious. If there isn't a good doctor, I'm afraid he won't be able to keep his life." Tang Xiu brought a few Jinghu Wei with her. They cried and cried. Their faces were covered in snot and tears, and they looked extremely miserable. Their cries attracted passers-by and common people to stop and watch. Some people in the crowd began to talk again. "Did you hear what they said? Is Prince Zhengshiren about to die of illness? Isn't that so? It seems like your Majesty hit him with a plank and then his old injuries flared up. Right now, Wang Yi's people are begging your Majesty to invite a doctor." Hiss. Someone sucked in a cold breath and said in a low voice, "What? Your Majesty didn't invite a doctor even after hitting someone?" The common people didn't dare to talk loudly. However, this kind of rumor that involved the imperial family's secrets spread quickly. When Li Chitian heard the commotion outside, he was so angry that the veins on his forehead bulged. He slammed the table fiercely. "This group of dog slaves. Aren't they trying to frame us as heartless and unjust?" Xiong Jinshui trembled as he led the palace servants and guards who came with him to kneel down. Li Chitian gritted his teeth. At this time, he knew that he had fallen into a trap. That bastard Niuji, she must have been on guard against him, so he purposely scalded Jiao Yongyan and purposely cut off his food and water, refusing to touch the food he arranged for him, causing such a serious illness. If something really happened to him right under his nose, he would have to bear the blame for murdering a loyal subject. What a treacherous and cunning fellow. Xiong Jinshui. Go out and bring them to invite a doctor. Tell them that we didn't forbid them from seeking a doctor, so why did they have to make such a fuss? Xiong Jinshui immediately understood that your Majesty had temporarily given up on that day's plan. He immediately complied and dashed out. However, several of Prince Zhengshiren's attendants were kneeling in front of the Yamen's entrance, crying their hearts out. The impact of this tragic scene couldn't be dispelled by Xiong Jinshui's casual explanation. Just as Tang Xiu was inviting an old doctor from the city to treat Pang Xiao, the group led by Qin Yining avoided the crowd and arrived at Golden Harbor. This place was near the sea, so the ports to Gugurio and Dongying were all here. The warships from Biji were also docked here. Chapter 1050. Young Master, look over there. Ji Yun, who was disguised as a handsome attendant, pointed at the workers who were working in full swing at the docks. Are they dismantling the ships? It's really a pity for these good ships. Your Majesty must not have seen these warships from the previous dynasty with his own eyes. Otherwise, he wouldn't be willing to dismantle them. Ji Yun grimaced in pain. Qin Yining sighed with emotion. That's right. During the time of Biji, who knows how much manpower and material resources were used to build these warships. At that time, Biji's navy could be said to be the overlord of the sea. They drove the barbarians out of the sea so that they wouldn't dare to invade the coastal people. Who would have thought that in just 100 years, these warships that had done so much to protect the people would be dismantled and used to build the imperial mausoleum? Qin Yining really didn't expect that Li Chitian would be so stupid as to kill the goose that laid the golden eggs. In the past, she didn't think that Li Chitian was so stupid, but now he had become like this. Could it be that when someone reached this position, their thoughts were no longer the same as before and they only considered their own power and benefits? She only pitied the people of Daju. The sea breeze blew, bringing with it the unique fishy smell of the coastal area. Qin Yining's outer robe fluttered in the wind, and the hairband used to tie up his hair also made a slight noise. Shu Weiji behind him smiled and said, "Young master, let's go into the city first. The wind here is cold, and it's not suitable to stand here for too long." "All right." Qin Yining smiled and turned around. He led the group down the cliff and walked towards the town not far away. As a big city near the docks, Golden Harbor not only covered a large area, but even the streets showed a different vibe of prosperity than they had seen along the way. It seemed that the lack of food after days of heavy rain didn't affect this place too much. Xie Yu and Shu Weiji followed Qin Yining on his left and right. They whispered, "People say that those who rely on the mountain eat the mountain and those who rely on the water eat the water. The people here are close to the sea, so they can at least fish to fill their stomachs. Even those who can't go out to sea without a large ship can gather seafood to eat. The spirit of the people here is different after all." Qin Yining nodded and said with a smile, "Just like when I was in Liang City, didn't I also rely on the mountains to make a living? Even if the outside world was in chaos, I still had a place to stay in the mountains. I could also hunt according to the seasons, gather herbs, and pick wild vegetables. I could also farm. As long as I don't yearn for the prosperity of the outside world, I can live a good life by myself." Everyone knew what Qin Yining had gone through in her early years. Now that she was talking about it with a smile, it was obvious that she didn't take those hardships seriously. However, in the ears of others, they felt both admiration and sadness. In fact, their princess consort was the same as Wang Yi. Both of them had suffered a lot over the years. "Young master." At this time, Jinghu Wei, whom Pang Xiao had arranged to follow Qin Yining, came forward and said in a low voice, "I found the secret signal." Qin Yining's smile didn't change. He asked in a low voice, "Are you sure it was left behind by one of our men?" "Yes." "Good. First, order people to investigate in the direction of the secret signal. After confirming that there are no mistakes, return to the Fu Lai Inn in the city to report." "Yes." Jinghu Wei acknowledged and silently left the group. Qin Yining, on the other hand, continued to wander around the city with her people. After finding out about the local customs, she listened to most of the rumors and found out where LV Yun was living. Only then did she bring her people to an inn and booked a side courtyard. "I hadn't thought that such an important person as Mr. Lu would build a hut by the sea." Xie Yu couldn't help but sigh. Qin Yining smiled and invited everyone to sit. "Mr. Lu has been here for a long time. I think that he hopes to see those battleships from the closest distance, so he built a hut by the sea. However, the sea breeze here is quite strong. Mr. Lu must not be very comfortable here. This shows how much Mr. Lu values these battleships from the previous dynasty." Shu Weiji shook his head and sighed. "Mr. Lu is a sensible person. It's a pity that the Lu family doesn't have the same status as the Lu family. Although Mr. Lu is aloof, he may not have the right to speak in front of your Majesty." "Yes." Qin Yining sighed. That's why he asked Wang Yi for help. Qin Yining turned to look at Liao Zhibing. "Mr. Liao, Have you found the people who are good at sailing the ships that I asked you to look out for? I've already found them. They've all been settled outside the city. That's good. It's all thanks to Mr. Liao. Otherwise, I wouldn't know what to do. I really have to thank Mr. Liao. The people of the Qingtian Alliance were good at things that Jinghu Wei and the others were good at. During this period of time, Liao Zhibing and Meng Qin had been by Qin Yining's side and had put in a lot of effort. Liao Zhibing's face turned red from the gratitude and he quickly waved his hand. It's my honor that the Alliance Master trusts me. There's no need to be so polite. We're all brothers of the same family. Qin Yining smiled and said, yes, we're all brothers of the same family. I'm being too polite. The few of them chatted and laughed for a while. At this moment, Jingzhe quickly walked in. Princess consort, there's news. Qin Yining's spirits were lifted and he couldn't help but sit up straight. He looked at Jingzhe questioningly. Jingzhe said, our people found out that Wang Yi went to Huichuan County and was escorted into the city by Your Majesty's people. Your Majesty even hit Wang Yi with a plank. Wang Yi's condition isn't very good now that he's injured. When Jingzhe said this, he carefully observed Qin Yining's expression. When he saw that she only frowned and didn't say anything else, he continued, it said that Wang Yi's bodyguards even knelt down and begged Your Majesty to allow them to go to the city to get a doctor. Many people are saying that Wang Yi's illness has reached its end. The room was silent. Xie Yu and Xu Weiji both had heavy expressions on their faces. Ji Yun gritted her teeth and said, could it be that Your Majesty won't even invite an imperial physician for Wang Yi and wants Wang Yi's people to kneel down and beg for it? I'm not sure about that. Jingzhe said bluntly, Princess consort, this news has already spread to this place and many people have already heard it. It's unknown whether it's accurate or not. Princess consort, you don't have to take it to heart. When Qin Yining heard this, she looked outside and saw that Xiao Shui and the others were guarding outside. After confirming that no one could hear them, she said, I understand. However, Xie Yu was so angry that her face turned red. Wang Yi has made great contributions to the country. How can he be humiliated like this now? The dignified Prince Zhongshiren is actually being pressed down and beaten with a plank. Xu Weiji's hands were trembling. Thinking about it, Wang Yi is such a hero. He didn't get so sick even when he was seriously injured in front of the two armies. This time, he must have been severely humiliated by Your Majesty and was so angry that he became like this. Ji Yun's eyes were filled with tears. They're going too far. They're simply going too far. Qin Yining knew that Pang Xiao would definitely face a bad situation when he went to Huichuan County. However, she didn't expect that Li Qitian would directly press him down and beat him with a plank. She didn't know how Pang Xiao's injuries were now. She also didn't know how Pang Xiao was feeling right now. After all, they could inquire about this plank in Golden Harbor. Presumably, all the civil and military officials in the capital also knew about it. Chapter 1051. Qin Yining shook his head and slowly said, no need. Since everyone knows about this, Your Majesty will not allow anything to happen to Wang Yi. We have more important things to do right now. If we don't do it well, there will be more trouble in the future. Qin Yining's words were vague, but everyone present was smart. How could they not understand the meaning? Xie Yu said in a low voice, logically speaking, if this news was spread by word of mouth, it shouldn't have reached here so quickly. There is something fishy about this. But Your Majesty is a person who cares about face. If something really happens to Wang Yi, Your Majesty will not be able to escape responsibility. Yes. If Wang Fei didn't say it, Nubi wouldn't have reacted. Ji Yun said, Your Majesty most likely will not harm Wang Yi right now, and will protect Wang Yi. Everyone nodded in agreement. Qin Yining was worried about Pang Xiao's injuries and his mood was heavy. But she knew what was the most important thing right now. She had mentally prepared herself that Pang Xiao's side might not be successful. No matter what happened, she had to think of a way to expand the power of Pang Xiao. Only when the power in her hands was strong could she have a check on Li Qitian. Only then would Li Chitian have to think twice before acting against Pang Xiao and not act rashly. Taking a deep breath, Qin Yining adjusted his emotions. He temporarily suppressed his worry and said, "Right now, we only need to see if the other people are successful. If they can safely transport the goods here, our plan will be half complete. The other half will depend on Mr. Liu." Xie Yu and Xu Weiji nodded in agreement and then asked, "Wang Fei plans to personally meet Mr. Liu?" "Of course," Qin Yining said with a solemn expression. "Mr. Liu is a great scholar. There's no need to talk about his virtue and status. If Mr. Liu didn't think about the country and didn't care about the warship, my understanding of him would only stop at the level of his knowledge and knowledge. Now I can see that he is a noble and wise man who cares about the country and the people. I am just a woman. Even if I went to visit him personally, Mr. Liu might not be willing to see me." After the incident with Dao Hanshan, Qin Yining realized how much women were looked down upon in this world. Moreover, the more knowledgeable a person was, the more they despised women. Xie Yu smiled and said, "You don't have to worry. Wang Yi should have arranged everything clearly. Since Mr. Liu agreed to Wang Yi's proposal and is now willing to settle down here, it means that he doesn't care that you are a woman." Knowing the knot in Qin Yining's heart, Xu Weiji also smiled and comforted, "Wang Fei is a woman who does not lose to men. We all say in private that if Wang Yi didn't have a virtuous wife like Wang Fei by his side, how could his actions be so smooth? Wang Fei has helped Wang Yi a lot. Only those blockheads would care that Wang Fei is a woman." Qin Yining felt their good intentions and said with a grateful smile, "Many thanks for your comfort. In reality, I've already thought it through. Everyone's circumstances are different and their personalities are different. Naturally, their thoughts are different. Right now, I only ask that I can help Wang Yi complete the important matter at hand and not be a burden to Wang Yi. I am satisfied. How can Wang Fei be a burden to Wang Yi? Wang Yi has a virtuous wife like you. It's like a tiger that has grown wings." Just as the atmosphere in the room was warm and everyone was talking and laughing, the sound of footsteps suddenly came from outside. Someone was talking in a low voice and then the footsteps gradually came closer. Qin Yining looked up with a serious expression and saw several strong men quickly walk in. The people in the lead looked familiar, but he couldn't remember their names. The 5 people came forward and respectfully bowed. Subordinates Lin Yu, Wen Tianqi, Zong Wenxian, Yang Rong, and Gda Shun greet Wang Fei. "Quickly rise. Everyone has worked hard. Please take a seat." Qin Yining politely stood up and gestured. The 5 people stood up together and didn't dare to take a seat. The leader, Lin Yu, was the Jinghu Wei who had been ordered to contact the others. At this time, he explained, subordinates were ordered to investigate the situation. After confirming that everything was fine, I contacted a few brothers. The goods we were transporting are now hidden in an abandoned village by the sea. The people there have already moved into the city. There are rumors that the village is haunted. It looks like the place is inauspicious. It's perfect for us to hide there. Qin Yining couldn't help but smile. "You guys really know how to choose a place. A place that is considered inauspicious. Even if the people hear something, they won't dare to investigate." "That's right." Wen Tianqi was the youngest, just 17 this year. Seeing that Wang Fei was so approachable, he couldn't help but scratch the back of his head and smiled honestly. This idea was thought of by Brother Ji. "At first, I said that this place wasn't appropriate and was quite scary. Brother Ji said that with him around, it would be auspicious." Gda Shun was already 30 years old. He looked at Wen Tianqi as if he was looking at his own younger brother. Hearing this, he couldn't help but blush. Qin Yining smiled and said, "Brother Ji's name is auspicious and smooth. This is a good sign. We will definitely succeed this time." Everyone laughed. Qin Yining said, "Since the goods are safe, brothers, I will have to trouble you to guard them well. At the same time, pay attention to the situation at the pier. Use the light of the fire as a signal." As she said this, she leaned close to them and whispered a few words. Hearing this, they all nodded. "Wang Fei, don't worry. This isn't difficult." Everyone saluted and left the inn, going their separate ways to return to the abandoned village by the sea. Qin Yining stood up and said with a smile, "I will go and pay a visit to Mr. Lu. I would like to ask the two of you to come with me." Xie Yu and Xu Weiji couldn't help but laugh. "You are a heroine among women. Why would you be afraid? You are just giving us two old fellows a chance to meet Mr. Lu. What are you saying? I am young and inexperienced. I don't have the right to speak in front of Mr. Lu. With the two of you here, I will have some confidence." The two of them could see that Qin Yining's words came from the bottom of his heart. Their hearts were especially warm. They modestly left the inn with Qin Yining and headed towards the sea. Although it was said to be a hut, it was actually a simple straw hut built with wood as the frame and straw mats as the roof and four walls. Qin Yining stepped on the large and small gravel and sand by the sea. Facing the strong wind, his clothes fluttered. Before they could get close, a gap was pushed open on one side of the straw hut. Lu Yun poked her head out and saw Qin Yining's group. She seemed to be surprised by the handsome appearance of the young man in the lead. Her eyes widened slightly, and then a look of understanding appeared on her face. "Young master, is your surname Qin?" Lu Yun asked with a smile. Qin Yining saw that Lu Yun was so polite and quietly let out a sigh of relief. He bowed even more politely. "Greetings, Mr. Lu. My surname is indeed Qin. I have come on Brother Pang's orders to ask Mr. Lu to fulfill the agreement." Chapter 1052. This one could not ask for more. Qin Yining smiled and cupped his hands. Xu Weiji and Xie Yu also respectfully bowed to LV Yun. The two sides modestly declined for a while before entering the straw hut. The light in the straw hut was unexpectedly bright. Because the roof was leaking, sunlight shone through the cracks and into every corner. There was only a straw mat and a quilt on the ground. There were several large flat rocks in the corner with porcelain cups and pots placed on top of them. There was a small clay stove on the ground and a metal kettle sitting on top of it. There was water boiling inside. Qin Yining couldn't help but feel deep respect for such a great scholar who was willing to live in such a simple and crude place for the sake of the warships that the imperial court was about to destroy. After entering the straw hut, he bowed to LV Yun as a woman greeting her elders. "Mr. LV is so devoted to the country. This concubine truly admires you. Please accept this concubine's bow." Xie Yu and Xu Weiji also bowed again with sincerity. Hearing this, LV Yun couldn't help but be moved. She quickly reached out to support them. "Wang Fei, you don't need to be so courteous. This is what this old man should do. This old man still has to thank Wang Yi for his help. Otherwise, this ship might not be able to stay." As they spoke, they sat down around the large rock. LV Yun took out a porcelain kettle and a handful of tea leaves from a small clay pot. She carelessly brewed a pot of tea. "This place is very simple and crude. Wang Fei, just treat it as a picnic." LV Yun poured tea for Qin Yining. Qin Yining quickly held the teacup with both hands and said with a smile, "Many thanks, Mr." Xie Yu and Xu Weiji didn't dare to trouble LV Yun. They took the teacup and poured tea for themselves. They sat down again. Qin Yining went straight to the point. When this concubine came, Wang Yi had already explained the situation by the sea. "Has Mr. chosen a ship to keep?" LV Yun sighed softly. Her eyes were filled with sorrow and reluctance. To be honest, this old man really can't bear to part with a single one of those warships. It's a pity that the imperial court gave a decree, and the Ministry of Works arranged for people to start work. This old man can't stop it. I could only use my connections to quietly leave some newer and better warships parked on the side of the harbor. Even if they were to be dismantled, they would be dismantled on the inside. These workers are dismantling the ships one by one. Half of the 100 warships have been dismantled already. When LV Yun spoke to this point, she shook her head and sighed. And pointed in the direction of the city, for us to start work. These old fellows who have protected this part of the sea and the mountains and rivers are not dead yet, but their ships are about to be dismantled. Qin Yining sighed, there is no other choice. A villain is slandering us, and your majesty has given a decree. It is impossible not to dismantle them. Fortunately, we have other countermeasures. In any case, we can do our best to preserve some. Yes. This is the fire, and the hope of the Daju Navy in the future. When LV Yun spoke to this point, she changed the topic. When does Wang Yi plan to make his move? LV Yun's question was vague, but Qin Yining could already read LV Yun's meaning from her eyes that seemed to have seen everything clearly. This old man was truly a wise man. Perhaps he had already guessed something. Qin Yining would not directly hand over the topic to others. He smiled and said, "If there are no accidents, we will choose to make our move tomorrow evening. Do we not have to make some preparations beforehand?" Preparations? LV Yun smiled. Since Wang Fei has made arrangements for everything, this old man will not interfere with Wang Fei's preparations. This old man does not know anything. I just came here to enjoy the sea breeze and look at the warship. Hearing her say this, Qin Yining was naturally satisfied. LV Yun was a smart person. She had already guessed that they could not protect the warship for no reason. They would use the warship to do something, but she did not ask in detail. Therefore, people without curiosity could be safe in the court. It is good that Sir LV has such a refined interest. The sea breeze is strong and humid. Sir LV should take care of your body. Yes. This old man plans to leave in a bit. They chatted for a while more before Qin Yining respectfully bid farewell. After Qin Yining left with his people, LV Yun came out of the straw hut. She looked at the warship docked at the dock not far away and the workers tearing it down in full swing. Her gaze gradually became complicated. She did not know if Prince Zhongxian's actions would be able to protect the warship. She heard that Your Majesty had found the whereabouts of the treasure and had already left the capital. She only hoped that Your Majesty's attention would be focused on the treasure and not concern herself with this matter. I did not expect Sir LV to be so amiable and approachable. Xie Yu sighed with emotion as she walked by the sea. Xu Weiji smiled and said, "Sir LV is a smart person. Since he has already asked Wang Yi for help and agreed to Wang Yi's conditions, he naturally will not do anything unnecessary." She turned to look at Qin Yining. "We will begin tomorrow night. Should we tell them to be ready at any time?" "Yes." Qin Yining's expression became serious as he said, "When we return, have Sir Liao bring the people he found over. We will leave the inn early in the morning tomorrow." "Yes." The two of them nodded in response. The night passed uneventfully. The next morning, Qin Yining and his group left the inn early in the morning. Everyone was in charge of their own matters, and everything was proceeding in an orderly manner. When night fell, the workers at the docks were still busy dismantling the ships in full swing. A few lanterns were hung up high. In reality, they were not very useful on the large docks, but the cold waves on the surface of the sea were extremely beautiful. In a corner where no one could see, a few small boats were slowly approaching the warships docked at the periphery of the docks under the cover of darkness. One by one, the figures of people boarded the more than 30 warships. Immediately, someone lowered the ropes and lifted the heavy crates onto the two largest warships. After the boats left the docks for another 15 minutes, a strange gust of wind suddenly blew by the shore of the docks. It swept away a lantern on the table next to the work shed. The candle in the lantern quickly lit the straw shed to the side. With the help of the wind, the straw shed and the straw shed were set ablaze. "It's on fire! It's on fire!" The workers who were dismantling the ships usually lived in the work shed at night. Today, they did not get off work, so they were not in danger. However, they still had some luggage and bedding in the work shed. Now that their living quarters were on fire, they did not have time to dismantle the ships. They hurriedly ran to the work shed to put out the fire. Who would have thought that as soon as they left the docks, the pile of wood that was piled up on the side of the docks caught fire. It was swept away by the sea breeze and also set ablaze. The fire quickly spread and swept through the entire docks amidst the fierce wind. Heavens! It's a natural disaster. At this time, the workers and the supervisor did not care about anything else. Everyone hurriedly ran away from the docks. They only saw the wood and the docks burning. Soon after, The warships that were tied together by ropes at the docks were set ablaze one by one. What should we do? The local county magistrate who heard the news rushed over. He saw that the warships were set ablaze and the entire docks were engulfed in a sea of fire. The damp wood burned and thick smoke billowed out. It was as if they had fallen into hell. The county magistrate's legs went soft and he knelt on the ground. Chapter 1053. The entire Golden Harbor was in a state of chaos. The people from the Water Dragon Bureau hurriedly rushed to the harbor, but the raging fire stretched for miles. The wood piled up at the harbor and the docked warships were engulfed by the fire. They had no idea where to start. The people of Golden Harbor were alarmed. They panicked and looked at the sea from the cliff at the end of the town. They had never seen such a huge fire in their entire lives. Even the sky was dyed red by it. The connected warships were burning. The sea breeze roared. The sea surface was also burning for some reason. It was as if a huge dragon was burning. Thick smoke billowed and covered the sky. Some of the people were worried. Some wiped their tears. Some knelt on the ground and kowtowed to the gods, praying that the people of Golden Harbor would be safe. They prayed that the heavens would stop punishing them. They must have dismantled the warships. Even the heavens don't agree. An experienced elder angrily held onto his walking stick. Someone else said, "We didn't cherish our warships. That's why the heavens want to take them back. They won't be used by the people of Daju. What should we do?" A woman cried. The local magistrate looked for paper and pen with trembling hands. He reported to Your Majesty that the warships were on fire for no reason and the entire harbor was engulfed in flames. Perhaps it was a warning from the heavens. The magistrate didn't want to be labeled as a failure, but he seemed to have forgotten that he cared about the heavens. The heavens sent a warning and burned the warships that he wanted to build the imperial mausoleum. Could it be that the heavens were dissatisfied with him as the emperor? The magistrate couldn't think about these things for the time being. No one noticed that after the fire and thick smoke, more than 30 warships of various sizes slowly left the harbor and headed southeast at full speed. No one noticed that a small donkey was carrying an immortal-like old man and leaving Golden Harbor under the cover of the night. They were heading in the direction of the capital. "Present Your Majesty, Your Majesty." In the Huichuan County Yamen, Li Chitian was being helped by Xiong Jinshui to change his clothes. He heard a rough and urgent voice outside. "There's an urgent report from Golden Harbor." Li Chitian frowned. He casually ordered, "Back off." Then he strode to the front hall. He saw a man in a tight suit standing in the middle of the ground with a worried expression. It was none other than the secret agent, Zhu Meng. "What's the matter?" Li Chitian casually sat down. Zhu Meng presented the memorial and the secret report together, then lowered his head and carefully retreated to the side. When Li Chitian saw Zhu Meng's cautious appearance, he knew that something must have happened to Jin Gang. He first opened the secret report sent by the spy, and his expression changed greatly after a glance. Then, he opened the report sent by the Golden Harbor County Magistrate, and his face turned ashen as he fiercely slammed the table. What warning from the heavens? Whose warning was it? Were those trash all eating rice for free? I only asked them to dismantle a few ships, but they actually burned down the entire pier. What use do I have for this group of trash? Your Majesty was so angry that Xiong Jinshui and the palace servants all knelt down in panic. From what he heard, Jin Gang caught fire and burned down the ships Your Majesty used to build the imperial mausoleum. Xiong Jinshui felt that something bad was going to happen. Li Chitian was so angry that he was walking around in circles, panting heavily. "Trash, a group of trash. What use do I have for you all?" He walked to the table and waved his hand, causing the ink, paper, and inkstone on the table to fall to the ground. The blue and white porcelain brush fell to the ground and shattered, and the water inside spilled all over the floor. "Your Majesty, please quell your anger." Everyone kowtowed. Li Chitian roared, "Quell my anger? How can I quell my anger? I only wanted to build an imperial mausoleum. First, I was greedy. Then, I used shoddy materials to buy stones. Now, all the wood has been burned down. You said it was a warning from the heavens, but what did I do that required a warning from the heavens? I love the people like my own children, and I work hard every day, not daring to neglect them in the slightest. Even if it was a warning from the heavens, it was telling me not to forgive you bunch of mediocre people. Your Majesty, please quell your anger. Everyone kowtowed again. Li Chitian was panting like an ox. He gritted his teeth and said, investigate thoroughly. Why would there be a fire at the seaside for no reason? There must be something fishy about this. If you can't find out the reason and insist that it was a warning from the heavens, I will kill everyone at the docks and bury them with my wood. Yes. Zhu Meng accepted the order and quickly retreated. Li Chitian then gave a few more orders, ordering people to investigate the situation at Jingang as soon as possible. After waiting for 2 hours, he found someone to ask how many ships were left. When he heard that all the ships at the docks had been burned down, Li Chitian angrily smashed the 4 treasures of the study he had just brought. Li Chitian didn't avoid people when he was angry, so the guards outside the door vaguely heard the commotion. Although they didn't dare to spread rumors, there was no guarantee that these sounds wouldn't be heard by other people. For example, Tang Xiu, who served Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao was currently recuperating in the rear courtyard of the Yamen. When he heard the news from Tang Xiu, a smile appeared on his slightly pale face for the first time in several days. With such a big commotion, Sister Yi must have safely boarded the ship with the treasure. No one would have thought that the treasure would be on the warship of the previous dynasty, carried by his darling and far away from Li Chitian's search. Tang Xiu saw Pang Xiao smile and couldn't help but lower her voice. She joked, Wang Yi is secretly happy to have such a virtuous wife like Wang Fei. Pang Xiao's sword-like eyebrows rose and he also said in a low voice, You brat, you've grown bold. If Wang Fei heard this, she wouldn't be willing to marry Ji Yun to you. Tang Xiu's young and delicate face immediately turned red. When Pang Xiao saw this, he couldn't help but smile comfortably. Everything was going well. His injuries should be gradually getting better. This would prevent him from being delayed when he needed to do something in the future. Tang Xiu happened to hear these words. But the imperial bodyguards didn't dare to spread the news. When Lu Heng received the news that something had happened at Golden Harbor, it was already 3 or 4 days later. Count, the people on the streets are saying that a huge dragon flew to Golden Harbor a few days ago. First, it breathed fire to burn the warships. Then, it blew a gust of wind that made it impossible for people to go close to put out the fire. That fire dragon lay on the surface of the sea until the sun rose and all the warships were burned to ashes before it flew into the clouds. Lu Wanru had been asked by Lu Heng to return to his side because she was used to serving him. When she heard the news outside, she hurriedly came to report. When Lu Heng heard this, he put down the book in his hand in shock. Fire dragon? That's right. It can breathe fire and blow wind. The people at Golden Harbor have made it sound like a god. This lowly one also heard it from the people on the streets. The warships were all destroyed. Lu Heng frowned. Lu Wanru nodded. Yes, it is said that not a single warship was left. Even the dismantled wood on the shore was burned. Fortunately, there were no casualties among the people. The fire at the docks did not spread to the city. The fire has already been extinguished. Chapter 1054. Lu Wanru was taken aback by Lu Heng's question. He carefully thought about Your Majesty's recent actions and said with a bitter smile, Why do I feel that Your Majesty seems to have been bewitched? For the sake of the treasure and the imperial mausoleum, he's gone crazy. Lu Heng nodded, he's firmly seated on the throne and has deep expectations for the future. The people place great importance on the glory of the deceased. Naturally, he's anxious to build the imperial mausoleum. However, he's too impatient and too confident in his absolute rule over the Daeju dynasty. He's forgotten about the people's hearts and what the officials care about the most. The officials want to be promoted and get rich. This is human nature. However, No one is willing to constantly be at the side of a tyrant. Even Prince Zhongshiren, who has outstanding military achievements, was treated like this by your majesty, let alone the ordinary civil officials. The Son of Heaven leaving the capital for no reason has already shaken the hearts of the court. In addition to the news of Pang Xiao's treatment and the fire dragon incident at Golden Harbor, the already unstable hearts of the people will become even more unstable. If I'm not wrong, your majesty will depart for the capital in a few days. Lu Heng took a sip of tea and said slowly. Lu Wenru's heart skipped a beat. He said worriedly, Count, your majesty will probably deal with the matter of the treasure when he returns to the capital. I don't know if your majesty believes you. If Prince Zhongshiren finds something wrong with us and your majesty blames us, what should we do? Lu Heng smiled and didn't immediately respond to Lu Wenru's words. When he talked about Pang Xiao that day, it was nothing more than using the resources of the aristocratic families and your majesty's suspicion of Pang Xiao to buy himself some time. Do I have to stay and wait for death? Lu Heng smiled faintly. He picked up the teacup and focused on drinking tea. Lu Wenru paused for a moment and then understood everything. He was a bit worried that Lu Heng would abandon him at a critical moment. After all, if there really was a time to escape, Lu Heng shouldn't have the time to care about others under heavy pursuit, right? However, Lu Wenru had served Lu Heng for many years and felt that he knew many of Lu Heng's secrets. If Lu Heng didn't bring him along, he would be afraid that he would leak the secret, right? Or would he kill him? When Lu Wenru thought of this, all of his hairs stood. He only wanted to be a follower and didn't want to be involved in these matters. Lu Heng seemed to see through Lu Wenru's worries and smiled. You should prepare well for the next few days so that you can set off. These words were too ambiguous, scaring Lu Wenru into quivering. Seeing him like this, Lu Heng could not help but burst out laughing. What are you thinking? Do you think I'm the kind of person who's only to escape? Don't worry, even if I don't bring Madame Bien, I will bring you. Lu Wenru wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and smiled bitterly. Uncle, don't make fun of this lowly one. Lu Heng shook his head. How is this making fun of you? It's just for the sake of the Lu clan's peaceful future. As the head of the Lu clan, I've never forgotten the importance of the clan. That's right, how's the matter I asked you to do? Lu Wenru immediately became serious and lowered his voice. It's done. We're just waiting for the news. Good. Then you'll stay by my side for the next few days and do as I say. Lu Heng smiled and nodded. A fire-breathing dragon flew to Golden Harbor and burned down the docks, destroying all of the warships that your majesty wanted to build the imperial mausoleum. This news seemed to have grown wings and everyone in the capital knew about it. However, Li Chitian still wasn't appeased. More and more secret reports came in from 4 different places where the stone was transported. Those places didn't find any treasure. There were a total of 10 directions. Li Chitian stole 1, and of the remaining 9, 4 were confirmed to have no treasure. Li Chitian hoped that the remaining 5 would have results. After all, his treasury was already stretched thin. The limited silver had already been allocated to Lu Heng by the Ministry of Revenue a few days ago to buy new stone. Now that the warships were destroyed and the wood turned to ashes, he still had to find good wood. Wouldn't that increase his expenses? The silver was all in the stone factory. If something big happened that required silver, he wouldn't be able to find the money. Li Chitian's mouth began to blister overnight. Because of the rumors about the fire-breathing dragon at Golden Harbor, the capital also became restless. He also knew that it was a big taboo for the emperor to leave the capital, so he immediately ordered people to prepare to return to the capital. Xiong Jinshui asked, Your Majesty, Prince Zhongshiren's body hasn't fully recovered. The doctor said that Prince Zhongshiren really can't move around right now. May I ask if we should bring Prince Zhongshiren with us? Can't move around? Then have people carry him. Li Chitian sneered, even if we have to carry him, we have to carry him back to the capital. We still have things to ask him. Also, Lu Heng, all of you take good care of him. Don't let anything happen to Lu Boy. Xiong Jinshui hurriedly saluted. Yes, this servant obeys the decree. This servant will do it right away. Xiong Jinshui left to the back of the yamen. He stood on the corridor and gasped for breath several times before calming down the panic in his heart. It wasn't that he was a coward. It was just that Your Majesty was in a bad mood these days. His mood was unpredictable. Yesterday, because a small eunuch accidentally spilled a drop of water while pouring tea, he was dragged out and beaten 20 times. He was always by Your Majesty's side, so he really didn't dare to be careless. He was afraid that he would be caught and punished severely. Xiong Jinshui felt that his face was about to become as bitter as Imperial Physician Gao's. However, he didn't dare to let others see his bitter face. In front of others, he was still the steady chief steward. On his way to the back of the palace, he crossed the courtyard and asked to see Prince Zhongshiren. Not long after, an attendant respectfully invited him in. Xiong Jinshui naturally didn't dare to be arrogant in front of Pang Xiao. Even if this person had been beaten by Your Majesty, he was still very afraid. This servant pays respects to Wang Yi. Wang Yi's complexion looks much better. Pang Xiao's hair was disheveled, and a dark blue robe was draped over his snow-white inner robe. When he heard this, he coughed weakly. With Tang Xiu's help, he leaned against a large pillow and sat sideways. Eunuch Xiong, there's no need to be so courteous. This king's body is probably ill, and he won't be able to recover in a short period of time. Eunuch Xiong has specially come. Does Your Majesty have any orders? Looking at Pang Xiao's pale face and pale lips, Xiong Jinshui gritted his teeth and said, Wang Yi, Your Majesty has already ordered preparations to return to the capital. He will depart tomorrow or the day after. He specially ordered this servant to inform you. He paused for a moment to size up Pang Xiao's complexion and said, there are many imperial physicians in the capital, and their medical skills are good. Wang Yi's body will be able to recover quickly when he returns to the capital, and he will be able to complete Your Majesty's task as soon as possible. Pang Xiao naturally knew that the last sentence was added by Xiong Jinshui himself. Even though Xiong Jinshui was one of Li Qitian's people, he didn't want to generalize and make things difficult for him. As a result, he smiled and said, many thanks, Eunuch Xiong. Since this is Your Majesty's decree, this king will definitely obey. I will order people to prepare and return to the capital with Your Majesty. He hadn't thought that Pang Xiao would be so easy to talk to. Xiong Jinshui was overjoyed. He thought that perhaps Prince Zhongshiren really wasn't as dangerous as Your Majesty thought. He happily accepted and then turned to deliver the decree to the Lu Fu. Chapter 1055. Pang Xiao's injuries from the flogging had not yet healed. When Xiong Jinshui was present, he naturally had to hold on for the sake of his face. As soon as Xiong Jinshui left, Pang Xiao threw away his outer robe, hissed, and carefully turned over to lie down. He hugged the big pillow with both arms and breathed a sigh of relief. How can we not go back? If we don't obey the edict now, we will be more certain that Your Majesty has thoughts about this king, and will be more certain that the treasure was hidden by this king. Your Majesty is sensitive and suspicious, and this king knows his temperament too well. Pang Xiao's voice was lazy, so the more it is like this, the more we have to do the opposite. Your Majesty has his reasons for suspecting this king, but this king also has his ways. Even if he did it, he could find a way to get out of it. Now that he was separated from his wife and children, missing Sister Yi, his 2 children, and his family every day, how could he not know who the culprit behind this situation was? Tang Xiu frowned and thought for a moment, and then suddenly understood. She nodded and said, Wang Yi's words are reasonable. In that case, this subordinate will go and prepare the luggage and the carriage, ready to follow Your Majesty back to the capital at any time. Pang Xiao nodded, have the bodyguards prepare as well. After we set off, send half of the bodyguards to protect Your Majesty. Tang Xiu was stunned. Wang Yi, are you afraid that someone will assassinate Your Majesty? That's not necessarily the case. But on the way back to the capital, we must always be prepared. Now that Daju was in turmoil, Li Qitian still needed to be alive to stabilize the situation. At least, he could stabilize the world, and the people could safely pass this hurdle for the time being. Thinking of the reports from the south, Most of the granaries were in a state of emergency, and there were already people eating grass roots and tree barks to allay their hunger, and then looking at the luxurious life of the nobles in the capital, and your majesty's every move, which was focused on the treasure. Pang Xiao's originally happy mood became heavy. Although he had property, he still had an army in his hands to support, so he had to count Qiu Feishan's autonomy to balance his income and expenditure. Meanwhile, Sister Yi had also taken out most of her money to help the victims of the disaster. Moreover, feeding the people of the world should not be the responsibility of a single person. This was something Li Chitian should have considered. Now that he had just obtained the treasure, if he wanted to use it, he would have to avoid the limelight. He wanted to use the treasure to save more people. This was a good intention, but he would not put himself in danger because of this. Otherwise, wouldn't those who followed him be implicated? With so many subordinates, there must be a reason why they were willing to follow him. However, none of them would accept losing their lives for no reason. Pang Xiao closed his eyes and pretended to sleep, but he was calculating how to proceed in the future. Xiong Jinshui had already arrived at the Lu mansion and announced Your Majesty's decree. Lu Heng agreed without hesitation. After all, it was the emperor's departure, so there were a lot of preparations to be made. Li Chitian was hot-headed and led the troops to look for the treasure. Even if someone wanted to murder him, they would not be able to know his whereabouts immediately, so the journey was safe. However, he had already stayed in Huichuan County for many days. If he wanted to return to the capital without anyone knowing, it would not be easy. Therefore, this greatly increased the risk of Li Chitian returning to the capital. The bodyguards who were protecting the emperor were inevitably nervous at this time. Especially Ma Cheng, when he learned that the emperor was about to return to the capital, he immediately began to make arrangements. He did not have a chance to sleep for 2 consecutive days, so he was so worried that some of his hair fell off. He had escorted the holy chariot out safely and was about to bring her back in one piece. If something were to happen right under his nose, he was afraid that even the lives of his entire family would not be enough to pay for it. After intensive preparations, early the next morning, the troops and the ceremonial guards were neatly lined up on the street in front of the yamen. The cavalry of the 5 military camps sat upright on their horses, guarding the ceremonial guards and the carriage on both sides, preventing the onlookers from approaching. On this day, the commoners were also curiously waiting around, craning their necks to see what Your Majesty looked like. They wanted to see if he was like what the storytellers said, with a square face, wide ears, eyes like copper bells, a height of 9 feet, and a sturdy back. He did not look like an ordinary person. Not long after, the yamen's door opened, and the chatter of the commoners suddenly stopped. Several bodyguards carried a door plank out, and a tall man with long legs was lying on top of it. He looked very weak. The commoners all knew that Prince Zhongxian was beaten with a plank. Everyone was grateful that Pang Xiao had thought of a way to prepare rice for the commoners and taught some people how to plant terraced fields. However, the person who ordered Wang Yi to be beaten with a plank was Your Majesty, so everyone only dared to talk about it behind his back. At this time, everyone felt pity and sorrow in their hearts, but no one dared to say anything in front of him. Following that, a handsome young man wearing a brocade robe came out. Beside him was a beautiful young woman. Some people did not recognize him and asked the person beside them in a low voice, "Who is that? He's so handsome, is he Your Majesty's brother or nephew?" The person who was asked clicked his tongue in disdain. "That's County Magistrate Lu, Zhongibo. What are you thinking? What nephew? It was said that Your Majesty only had one crown prince. He had brothers and nephews, but Your Majesty had never put anyone in an important position. The current emperor was very afraid of the imperial family members taking charge of the affairs of the imperial court and whether or not they would seize power." The people who heard this began to whisper, "I didn't expect Zhong Yibor to be so handsome. Of course, Zhong Yibor is the head of the Lu family. What kind of family is the Lu family? They would obviously marry the most beautiful and talented wives, so their children would naturally not be bad." The people's voices rose and fell. Not long after, a bright yellow figure slowly walked out of the yamen. Seeing the eunuchs behind him and the guards of honor formed by the yellow umbrella and the eunuchs, the discussion of the people suddenly stopped. Everyone was curious to see what the emperor looked like, but now, they did not even have the courage to look at him directly. They all knelt down and shouted, "Long live the emperor!" For a moment, the sound of people shouting, "Long live the emperor," could be heard everywhere. Li Chitian saw his attendants and the people in front of the door all kneeling and kowtowing. Even Pang Xiao, who was leaning against the door, was the same. He was very happy. This was the sense of accomplishment that could only be enjoyed after unifying the country. This sense of accomplishment was something that could not be brought about by anything else. Li Chitian sat in the carriage, then raised his hand and waved outside, indicating for the people to get up. How could the people understand? They continued to kneel in place. Li Chitian did not mind. When Xiong Jinshui jogged over to inform Zhong Yibor and Prince Zhongshiren that they had boarded the carriage, Li Chitian responded, "Let's set out." Then, he leisurely leaned back on the soft pillow laid out in the carriage. Xiong Jinshui loudly sang, "Your Majesty has decreed, set out, set out." The accompanying cavalry of the 5 barracks immediately responded loudly. Their uniform roars resounded through the clouds, and their imposing manner was imposing. The people who had never seen fighting on the battlefield experienced the imposing manner of the cavalry of the 5 barracks. The people immediately shouted, "Long live your Majesty." You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.